harmful obsession. On May 2, 2009, in Wausau, Wisconsin, USA, a terrible crime took place. An 18-year-old girl named Brianna Marie Schneller was the victim. For the small town, such an event was shocking, particularly since the girl's death was the result of actions executed with unimaginable cruelty. However, more shocking than the crime itself was the motive behind it. Brianna had a vibrant personality, loved Mexican cuisine, music, and dancing, and she was fond of roller coasters. She was very diligent and performed well academically. She was the top student at Everest High School in Washington, said Craig and Lori Schneller, her parents. She had a trip planned to Tennessee that summer. The young lady was the only one in the state of Wisconsin who had made it through the qualifying rounds of a competition held by a renowned national non-profit organization for students in professional and technical fields, where she was to present her project. Brianna aspired to pursue higher education in restaurant management and dreamed of someday starting her own business in the food service industry. Therefore, she worked part-time at the El Mezcal restaurant in Rib Mountain to earn money and gain the necessary experience and skills. Friends, colleagues, and even patrons described her as a kind and responsive person. She was just a month away from significant milestones in her life. She was about to graduate from school and marry her beloved 22-year-old Sebastian Ramirez. Initially, her parents objected to their relationship and the age difference. In their view, their daughter had matured too quickly. However, after getting to know the young man better, they trusted him. It was evident that he genuinely loved Brianna and had serious intentions regarding their future together. The couple moved in together, renting an apartment on 12th Avenue in Wausau along with Sebastian's 19-year-old brother, Hugo. Outwardly, it seemed that the trio got along well and lived peacefully. Many envied their friendship. The brothers supported Brianna's interests, as they also worked at a restaurant called El Tequila Salsa in the same area. It is possible that one workday was when Sebastian and Brianna met each other. In any case, no one expected that a horrific tragedy could disrupt the plans and dreams of the two lovers. The morning of May 2nd, 2009 began as usual. Sebastian was the first to rise in the house. He didn't want to wake the girls sweetly sleeping beside him. It was a day off, and she didn't need to rush to school. While the young man was in the shower, Brianna woke up. They exchanged sweet greetings and discussed their plans for the day. Meanwhile, Sebastian tried to wake up Hugo, who had come home in the early morning and had clearly overdone it at a party the night before. After that, Sebastian left for work, which was only a 5-10-minute walk away. His younger brother followed soon after. The girl stayed home alone. She exchanged messages with her mother and then got on with her tasks. That day, Hugo felt restless. He had a headache from too much drinking and regretted overindulging. Struggling to focus, he decided to swap lunch breaks with a colleague, and at 1:20 p.m., he headed home to catch some sleep. When he entered the apartment, nothing seemed unusual at first. However, as he walked further, he noticed a disorder in his brother's and his girlfriend's room. For some reason, Brianna was lying on the floor. Hugo rushed to her and asked what happened, but she did not respond. He didn't immediately notice the blood. The young man moved the towel that had been covering her face and screamed. She was unrecognizably disfigured. He grabbed the phone to call the emergency services, but his hands were shaking and his mind was foggy. Nevertheless, he knew he had to act, and he ran to his neighbor's apartment, a floor below. Through tears, young Ramirez tried to explain what had happened and asked the woman to call for help. At 1:30 p.m., the emergency services received a call. Despite it being a Saturday, the day was far from peaceful. Unfortunately, incidents often occur on days when people are supposed to relax. The woman on the other end of the line reported that she was calling on behalf of a neighbor. He had asked her to summon emergency medical services for his brother's girlfriend. The unfortunate woman lay on the floor with cuts on her body and a disfigured face, showing no signs of life. Police and paramedics were dispatched to the address immediately. The parking lot of the apartment building was crowded. but one individual stood out from the crowd and approached them. It was Hugo Ramirez. He led the officers to the apartment. The young man could barely speak, so he simply pointed out the shocking scene. At the center of it all lay Brianna, her body bearing deep wounds. Stab wounds were evident on her chest, neck, and wrist. The officers asked the young man to leave the room while forensic specialists began their examination. One speculated that the victim had been lying there for some time, as the blood scattered everywhere had already started to dry. It was clear she had fought back, as evidenced by the defensive cuts on her arms. However, the assailant had overpowered her. The crime scene was rife with evidence. The first thing the forensic team noticed was a bloody iron lying on the floor, broken with some pieces scattered nearby. It appeared that the criminal had used it to strike her face. 2 knives lay in the bathroom sink, one missing its sharp tip. Blood was found on the soap, leading investigators to speculate that the criminal had used it to wash their hands. But the bloodied shoe print left on the carpet drew more attention. Overall, the examination of the dwelling revealed several curious details. There appeared to be no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the victim knew the wrongdoer or that he had some way of gaining entry to the apartment. Another notable detail was the scattered bills ranging from $1 to $20, amounting to a substantial sum. Hugo explained that these were tips they had accumulated at work, so much so that they were just placed anywhere. At first glance, nothing seemed to be missing from the apartment. Everything pointed to the fact that Brianna was the target of the attack, not robbery. This was confirmed by the broken knife tip found in her body. What kind of force was necessary to break a knife? Who could harbor such feelings towards a young woman? And most importantly, what could have been the cause of such unprecedented cruelty and aggression? Eager to shed light on the matter, law enforcement officers were keen to speak with the girl's relatives and close friends, especially as they needed to convey the dreadful news. In the police department's office, Craig and Lori Schneller awaited news. They had heard that something terrible had occurred at the home where their daughter lived, but unfortunately, they had been unable to contact her. With heavy hearts, they went to the police station seeking answers. The officers had to confirm the parents' worst fears were indeed true. There was no greater sorrow for parents than to endure the loss of a child. The devastating news split the Schnellers' life into before and after. Authorities provided photographs of Brianna for identification. The process was a mere formality, as her identity was already established, but protocol required it. Due to the horrific injuries, not all photographs taken at the scene were shown to the family. Only those that showed part of her face were displayed. Once confirmed, the Schnellers could hardly believe what had happened. After consulting with a psychologist, Craig and Lori were able to answer a series of questions. They were eager to assist the investigation and catch the person responsible, so they provided as much information about their daughter's life as possible. The parents insisted that she had no known enemies or ill-wishers, at least to their knowledge. It was also revealed that Brianna's mother was the last person she had communicated with. That morning, Lori had taken Brianna's car to the auto repair shop and had messaged her daughter around 10 a.m. to inform her. Brianna had responded, "This means that the tragic incident occurred after she spoke with her mother and before Hugo's arrival, establishing a timeline for the events." The police launched a comprehensive investigation. The first to be invited for an interview by the detectives were the Rodriguez brothers, Sebastian and Hugo, who were questioned separately. The fiancé of the victim, Sebastian, reported that he woke up at 9:15 in the morning, had a brief conversation with Brianna while getting ready for work, and then woke his brother. By 10:15, he was already at the restaurant. He learned about the incident after receiving a phone call. Hugo's account matched, stating he left the house about 15 minutes after Sebastian. He returned home at 1:20 p.m. because he was feeling unwell and wanted to rest. However, his illness and fatigue vanished when he discovered Brianna lifeless. After that, everything seemed like a blur. He explained that he was so stunned that he couldn't think straight on how to react properly. His mind shut down and his hands trembled, leading him to run to a neighbor and ask for help. The Ramirez brothers' statements were credible and their distress appeared genuine. However, the police had often encountered convincing performances before, so they needed solid proof of their innocence. It was entirely possible that one of them was the perpetrator and the other was covering for him. Therefore, detectives inquired about their relationships with each other. Sebastian declared his love for Brianna and his anticipation for their upcoming wedding. Hugo was asked if he had any grievances against his brother's girlfriend or if they had quarreled, to which he responded negatively. He also clarified that despite her attractiveness and charm, he had no intentions toward her because he valued their good relationship and would never interfere with Sebastian's happiness. Brianna was like a sister to him. The interrogations lasted for hours, yet neither brother aroused any suspicion. After taking DNA samples from the young men, they were allowed to return home. To confirm or refute the Ramirez brothers' alibis, detectives interviewed employees of El Tequila Salsa restaurant and reviewed the establishment's surveillance footage. Sebastian and Hugo's accounts were corroborated. The theory of a domestic-related crime was dismissed. Then who was the murderer of this innocent young woman? Could there be a predator in the city? Perhaps he had been watching Brianna earlier and had learned much about her. Maybe on a day when she was alone, he executed his criminal intent. The investigation continued. By this point, the autopsy results had come in, confirming the initial suspicions of the police. The sequence of the crime was reconstructed as follows. Brianna first sustained a blunt force injury to the head, likely with an iron. Then the perpetrator cut her throat, followed by multiple stab wounds to her body. The ferocity and relentlessness of the attack were evidenced by the number of wounds, which were so numerous that even experts couldn't tally them. At least 2 of these injuries were immediately fatal. The young woman fought fiercely for her life, as indicated by the foreign DNA found under her nails. Later developments revealed that earlier statements claiming nothing was missing from the home were incorrect. The victim's phone had disappeared. Sebastian discovered the loss and promptly informed the detectives. This piece of information became a critical lead, as once the police received this new clue, they began searching for the mobile device. Brianna's cell phone provider reported that her phone was still active and provided its location. It turned out that the phone had been nearby all along, specifically within the premises of the restaurant where Sebastian and Hugo worked. The investigation grew more complex with the brothers' undeniable alibi, and one of them reporting the missing phone, against the backdrop of suspicious coincidences. Detectives urgently traveled to the specified location, but upon arrival, they found that the coordinates led to the parking lot of a shopping center housing the restaurant. It appeared the sought-after item was in one of the trash bins. After a brief search, a plastic takeout bag with the logo of El Tequila Salsa was found inside a container. Within the bag were the girl's phone, 2 mismatched gloves, and a pair of women's underwear. One of the gloves was stained with blood. This unexpected discovery shifted the narrative, as theories about a predator and a crime driven by intimate motives began to gain traction. The bag and its contents were sent to the laboratory for further examination, potentially still holding fingerprints or DNA from the perpetrator. When shown a photo of the contents, Sebastian recognized his girlfriend's underwear. The investigation proceeded with numerous interrogations of the restaurant staff. On May 5th, everyone was asked to provide DNA samples and undergo examinations for any scratches or injuries. Additionally, both the external and internal surveillance footage of the building and neighboring establishments was thoroughly reviewed. The police had a considerable task ahead of them to determine who had disposed of the bag. Initially, a kitchen worker attracted attention because he was notably late for work, arriving when Brianna was already lifeless. However, the young man had an alibi. He had been stopped for speeding on his way to the restaurant. Nonetheless, reviewing the surveillance footage proved invaluable to the investigation. Another individual, the 24-year-old kitchen manager Raul Ponce-Rocha, became a person of interest. On the day of the crime, he left the building at 10:18 a.m. wearing a brown hoodie and returned at 10:53 a.m. without it. During questioning, he was asked about his whereabouts and intentions. Raul explained that he had gone to pick up his friend Luciano, a dishwasher at the restaurant. Interestingly, Luciano lived in the same building as Brianna, Sebastian, and Hugo. When asked how long his errand took, he said about 20 minutes, but there was a problem with the timeline. What happened in the remaining 15 minutes? Raul refused to explain. Meanwhile, Luciano confirmed Raul's story, saying they did not stop anywhere on their way to work. However, the 15-minute discrepancy continued to trouble the detectives, and Raul's behavior raised questions. He had cuts on his hands, which he attributed to working with knives. Raul was clearly suspicious, but there wasn't enough evidence for his detention. By May 9th, it was established that on May 2nd, at 1:16 p.m., a single employee exited the back door of El Tequila Salsa, and at the same time, only one person approached the trash bins. Identifying the suspect took little time. When his name was announced, the investigative team was not surprised. It was not Sebastian or Hugo Ramirez, as initially thought, but the suspect Raul Ponce-Rocha. When a search warrant was obtained for his home, curious details about the manager's life emerged. Under the mattress of his bed were found 4 pairs of women's underwear, several adult videos along with a brown hoodie and a glove resembling the one found in the trash bin. On the same day, Raul's DNA samples were sent for comparison with those found on the plastic bag. A strand of female hair found on his clothing was also analyzed. Everything pointed to the victim, Brianna. It was just a matter of matching the test results. Raul was arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder. When it became known that the alleged perpetrator had been found, Sebastian couldn't believe his ears. He never thought his colleague capable of such cruelty. The main question that troubled him was, why did he do it? They hardly knew Brianna and had only seen her in passing. Raul had always seemed like a kind and cheerful guy, someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. But the answer was found. The trial of Raul Ponce-Rocha took place in 2011. Despite the lengthy investigation, Ponce-Rocha never admitted guilt and consistently denied any involvement in the crime. However, the prosecution presented compelling evidence. The defendant's DNA was found on all key pieces of evidence: the iron, the knives, the plastic bag and its contents, and under Brianna's fingernails. Additionally, a shoe print found on the carpet at the crime scene matched the size and pattern of the suspect's shoes. The investigation painted a clear picture of the events. On May 2, 2009, Raul arrived at work at 9 a.m. En route to the restaurant, he passed the victim's house, a place that had long piqued his interest. Not seeing her car, he assumed she was out and saw it as an opportune moment to enter her apartment and take what he desired. The accused had a peculiar habit of collecting women's underwear, the evidence of which was found under his mattress. After the Rodriguez brothers arrived at work, Raul left the restaurant under the guise of picking up Luciano. Instead of signaling his friend immediately upon arrival, he entered the victim's apartment. He easily unlocked the door and entered. It appears he went into Brianna's room and began rummaging through her belongings. He was likely caught off guard at that moment. Otherwise, he could have excused his unexpected presence by claiming he was looking for one of the brothers and that the door had been open. Realizing the absurdity of the situation and fearing recognition, he struck her with the first object he could find, an iron. He then slashed her throat with a knife, followed by inflicting multiple injuries. The investigation concluded that the process of taking her life seemed to gratify him, as evidenced by the excessive number of wounds inflicted on the poor victim. It also noted that Raul used multiple knives during the attack. Afterwards, the culprit tried to cover his tracks by washing his hands and removing his jacket, as he still had to meet Luciano and drive him to the restaurant. He then resumed work as if nothing had happened, which was captured on the kitchen's video recordings. When many staff took their lunch breaks, He seized the moment to dispose of the bag containing the evidence in a trash bin. Shortly before the trial, Raul stated that he indeed met with Brianna, but did not end her life. However, he suspected who might have done it and named a former restaurant employee. According to the defendant, he saw this acquaintance at Brianna's house on the day her life was tragically ended, thus confirming that he indeed entered the Ramirez apartment. However, when he left, Sergio stayed with Brianna, apparently having an argument. The defendant's statement raised additional questions and investigations. The information he provided was subject to verification. Moreover, the individual he mentioned was abroad. Nonetheless, authorities managed to contact Sergio. He even appeared at the trial to testify his non-involvement and refute Raul's slander. The young man easily proved that he was not in the country on the day of the crime. Weeks before, he had left to care for his gravely ill father in Mexico. Apparently, the defendant hoped that contact with Sergio would not be established, thereby sowing a seed of doubt among the jurors. However, his plan failed. The defendant merely emphasized that he had no qualms about falsely accusing an innocent person of a heinous crime. It was clear that he felt no remorse for his actions. During the trial, Brianna's relatives, as well as Sebastian and Hugo, were present. The young men struggled to contain their emotions, prompting officers to repeatedly call for calm. Ultimately, Raul Ponce-Rocha was found guilty of the crime against Brianna Schneller, as well as burglary. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He is serving his sentence at a correctional institution in Wausau, Wisconsin. Following the verdict, the victim's father stated that his daughter's case had become personal for many involved, as they all have families and children. He shared that he has not parted with a Father's Day card Brianna gave him, cherishing every memory of her. Craig Schneller confessed that Brianna's death broke his heart, and he lost faith. No information about Sebastian Ramirez is available. It is only to be hoped that he has closed this tragic chapter of his life with a sense of completeness and has been able to move forward. One day, his brother Hugo appeared on a television show discussing the ordeal they endured. Raul's actions were fatal for Brianna. He not only ended the life of a beautiful young woman, but also devastated the hearts of her family. Things could have been different if the young man had not chosen to cover his tracks. He might have gotten away with clumsy explanations and apologies to the girl. At most, it would have ended with a confrontation between him and the Rodriguez brothers. It is unlikely the victim would have reported him to the police, and even then, the incident could have been resolved with minimal harm, an innocent victim of her spouse's perverse passion. They say that an adult is simply impossible to re-educate because it is a formed personality with its views, way of thinking, preferences, character, and temperament. However, some women are sure that patience and pedagogical talent can work wonders. More experienced women realize that it is important from the very beginning to consider the man who is next to her, to study his shortcomings, and to understand whether she can live together with them, because falling in love and passion will pass, and the negative qualities with age will only worsen. If it is not about some minor shortcomings, but about real problems, such as addictions, pathological tendency to lie and violence and so on, it is better to run away from such a person without looking back. But in women, often in such cases, manifests the rescuer syndrome, an acute desire and irrepressible desire to help, at the cost of their own well-being. It is this syndrome ruined a young British woman named Vicky Roberts, who almost 3 years struggling for her love, trying to re-educate her cheating husband with sadistic tendencies. Unfortunately for the girl, all her efforts turned out only pain, humiliation, and cruelty. Vicky and Michael Roberts. Vicky Roberts, born Victoria Smith, was born in September 1984 in the county of Cheshire, in the northwest of England. She was the younger of 2 daughters in a rather conservative and deeply religious family. Together with her sister, she attended a Christian school and also practiced music and sang in the choir. People around her described her as a very kind, friendly, and helpful girl, always ready to help others. After graduating from high school, Vicky went to university, and at the same time got a job in one of the stores of the chain IKEA to pay for her own education. It was there that the girl soon met a young man named Michael Roberts, with whom she first started a friendly relationship. The new acquaintance was only a year older than Vicky. He also got a job at IKEA in parallel with his studies, and he also played sports, carefully watched himself, and was able to make a pleasant impression on others. At first, the sociable and charismatic Michael seemed too talkative and overly intrusive to the modest Vicky, but he quickly managed to gain her attention and favor. It is worth saying a few words about Michael and his family. He was born in June 1983 in Warrington, Cheshire, and was the eldest of 2 sons in the family of a prominent chemical engineer. Parents brought up their children in strictness, and high expectations always laid on the eldest heir, who studied well at school, grew up ambitious, purposeful, and able to achieve what they wanted. The guy always had a lot of friends. He could easily become the soul of any company, but most of all, he was proud of his victories on the love front. Michael had a bright and attractive appearance, was tall, trim, with a good sense of humor, and the ability to show himself at his best. To everything else, this handsome man was also very intelligent, well-read, could easily support a conversation on any topic. Parents from childhood indoctrinated the eldest heir that he is the best, the most beautiful, intelligent, and will certainly succeed. All this probably provoked in the guy narcissistic disorder, which with age progressed. At the same time, Michael was always very afraid to upset his dad and mom, and therefore did everything to be the perfect son for them, and meet all their expectations. Roberts never had a permanent girlfriend. He regularly changed girlfriends and mistresses, could spin several novels in parallel, so that none of his passions did not realize that she was not the only one. The guy was confident in his irresistibility, could find an approach to any girl, and he really liked to conquer unavailable girls. This process he perceived as a kind of game or competition. Just such a modest and inaccessible girl was Vicky, which Michael decided by all means to conquer. At first, she stubbornly kept her distance and refused even innocent offers to walk after work or drink coffee somewhere. Smith spent almost all her time studying, and on weekends she went to church, so she didn't even think about dating, let alone any relationship. It took Michael a few months for Vicky to finally agree to go out with him. He was sweet, charming, touchingly courted her, gave her flowers, gifts, and little surprises. He even invited her to a family dinner at his parents' house, who liked Vicky very much and immediately approved of their son's choice. Vicky believed he was serious and gave in. He became her first man and remained the only one. She was truly happy around him, and it seemed like fate to her. Michael also seemed to fall in love and was ready to settle down, but it didn't last long. 50 Shades of Michael. From the outside, their romance seemed perfect. They were both young, attractive, full of energy, ambition, and made huge plans for the future. But soon Vicky realized that her chosen one has one peculiarity, namely, an irrepressible sexual appetite and passion for experimentation in bed. At first, he did not put too much pressure on his chosen one in this regard, fearing that Vicky would leave him, but as soon as the guy realized that she would not go anywhere from him, he, as they say, opened the cards. The modest and religious girl was literally shocked by what was happening, but she was head over heels in love with Michael, and therefore trusted him, and for a long time did not tell anyone about what was happening in their bedroom behind closed doors. In addition, her lover made her an official marriage proposal, which she gladly accepted, sincerely believing that after the wedding everything will change and the chosen one will stop his experiments. Soon, one of Vicky's closest friends began to notice that she carefully disguises and hides bruises and small bruises under her clothes. She brought Smith into a frank conversation and asked if her fiancé was beating her and if she needed help. Vicky tried to deny everything, but then still admitted that all these marks are the consequences of intimate experiments Michael, who had a special passion for binding, the use of various toys and devices. She also secretly told her friend that they have with the chosen intimacy happens up to 5 times a day, while he still remains hungry and unsatisfied. Michael considered himself a skillful lover, and intimacy for him was a kind of art and a way of self-expression. Sometimes he made concessions when Vicky refused to participate in some completely crazy and even dangerous experiments, but in most cases, he still managed to persuade the girl in love with him. Unplanned pregnancy. After defending her diploma, Vicky decided to change jobs and was soon hired as an account manager at a logistics company. Michael also quit IKEA and got a job as a sales consultant in one of the stores of a large retail chain, selling phones, laptops, and other electronics. He almost immediately became one of the best employees because thanks to his charisma, communication, and persuasive skills, he always exceeded sales targets. Soon, the new young employee was promoted to senior salesman, and the management seriously considered his transfer to the main office. But before that, he had to undergo training and improve his qualifications. Michael enjoyed attending training sessions, going on business trips to London, and was very proud of himself. He seemed to have forgotten all about his young fiancée and only remembered when he needed intimacy. They didn't talk about each other. They hardly ever went anywhere together, and outside the bedroom, Vicky seemed to cease to exist for him. At the same time, he began to have affairs on the side with colleagues, clients, and just casual acquaintances. Michael was literally obsessed and addicted to intimacy, and intimacy with different women, and constant new victories on the personal front were an important part of maintaining his self-esteem. At this time, Vicky discovered that she was pregnant and happily broke the news to her fiancé. They had already delayed the wedding, and it seemed to the girl that now Michael would hurry things up. But the news that he was going to be a father only made Michael angry and mad. He immediately began to insist that the child should be gotten rid of because they are still so young and they have their whole life ahead of them, and with offspring can wait. Vicky was shocked by such words, but flatly refused to terminate the pregnancy. Then the groom decided to press her in another way. Michael began to convince the bride that such news will cause anger in her religious parents, because their youngest favorite daughter lived with a man and got pregnant without being married. However, according to him, the termination of pregnancy will be hidden from everyone, and after the wedding, they will certainly have children. For Vicky, it was a difficult decision, but her chosen one had a real gift of persuasion, so that a few days later she gave in to persuasion and went to the hospital. Unfortunately, it was not without complications. Vicky for a few days stayed in the hospital, and then it took her almost 3 weeks to recover her health. For all this period, the doctor categorically forbade her to have an intimate life, and Michael, learning about it, went into a rage. Then Vicky finally realized that he had mental problems and a real addiction to sexual contacts. Beloved literally went crazy without intimacy and began to leave the house every day, explaining it with urgent matters at work. Vicky guessed that he was looking for intimacy on the side, but sincerely hoped that everything would change once they got married and she would help him get rid of this addiction. A loveless marriage and an adult mistress. The engagement lasted almost 2 years, and the man, apparently, did not even intend to marry the chosen one, because the current state of affairs suited him quite well. He had a fiancée who faithfully waited for him at home and fully served him in the household, and numerous mistresses on the side which he regularly changed. Vicky always took him at his word, and even if she found out about his cheating, she always forgave him, as long as he promised that it was the last time and he would not do it again. But time passed. Vicky began to insist on marriage, as she wanted a full-fledged family and children. Also, this question was increasingly raised by her parents, but most importantly, the wedding was insisted on by Michael's parents, whom he really did not want to upset. Modest and sweet Vicky, they liked them very much, and they considered her a great couple for their son, and were constantly interested in when they will get married and make them happy with grandchildren. Not without the help of their parents, the couple organized a lavish wedding with a white dress, limousine, and a beautiful away ceremony. The newlyweds looked in love and happy. It seemed that they had a long life ahead of them. But hardly any of the relatives guessed about the dark side of the man, with which his young chosen one was already so well acquainted. The newlyweds settled in a large and cozy house in the prestigious area of Warrington, not far from Roberts's parents. Michael did not love his spouse, however, marriage made him normal in the eyes of relatives and others. Vicky never complained to anyone about his strange predilections and constant cheating, and he could continue to change mistresses like gloves. At work, he was quite successful, got another promotion, and was making good money. After being transferred to a new office, Michael's direct boss was a certain Carrie Hall, the head of administration at Phones 4U. She was 10 years older than him, had been divorced for a long time, and was raising a son on her own. At the same time, Carrie was quite attractive, well-groomed, and, as her position required, determined and strong-willed. For a long time, she did not pay any attention to the signs of attention that she was given by a young subordinate. However, for the guy it became a kind of signal to action. He sought to achieve this woman, connecting all his natural charm and eloquence, and after about a month, Carrie reciprocated. Lovers began to meet regularly in hotel rooms, and their relationship the woman later described as turbulent, passionate, and full of experimentation. Carrie was a mature, self-confident woman. She was undoubtedly flattered by the attention of such a young man, and she was also not opposed to trying something new. So Michael could realize with her those fantasies, which did not dare his modest wife. He constantly lied to his wife about being late at work, attending corporate trainings and the like, and told his mistress how unhappy he was in marriage, that this union was a mistake of youth, and said that he was ready to divorce, but his wife does not give him a divorce. This relationship with Carrie lasted more than a year, but since the woman had no illusions about Michael, she did not insist on divorce, and she was quite satisfied with their meetings in hotels, marks on the body and dangerous games. After the beginning of relations with Michael, Carrie began to give preference to buried clothes with long sleeves and high throat, which was unusual for her. The woman was actively engaged in sports, and always liked to show others her stunning figure. And here suddenly, completely changed her style. Once Hall admitted to her close friend that her lover loves to experiment in intimate terms, and sometimes these experiments go beyond reason. As evidence, she showed a bite mark on her chest, which Michael left in a fit of passion. Also on her neck there were blue marks from squeezing by his hands, and on her wrists there were marks from the ropes, with which the boyfriend liked to tie her so that she was completely in his power. The friend was horrified and suggested that Carrie go to the police, but she refused, noting that all this was consensual, and in most cases, he warns her about what he is going to do, but the process itself can get out of control. For example, Michael loved to strangle his partner, convincing her that it would increase the pleasant sensations of the process. But a couple of times he was so much carried away that she lost consciousness. Vicky was very afraid of such games with strangulation, but every time she succumbed to her husband's persuasions and believed that one day he would get tired of it. He would leave his cruel and painful experiments, or she would get used to it and would perceive them as something ordinary. Unfortunately, neither his wife nor any of his mistresses even tried to stop Michael. Open correspondence and a love letter. Vicky had guessed about her chosen one's affairs on the side, even before they were married. She, most likely, even realized that he was addicted to it, but sincerely believed that something was about to change, and her love and care can turn daring and loving Michael into an exemplary family man. But after the wedding, the situation only worsened, and the young husband himself denied his cheating, and he did it very convincingly. Vicky decided to conduct her own personal investigation and looked into her husband's phone while he was sleeping. There she found numerous correspondence Michael with Carrie and several other girls, which he did not even bother to delete. Their content was quite intimate, moreover. With some girls, the guy exchanged explicit photos. This came as a shock to Vicky. She packed her things and decided to move in with her friend for a while. She did not tell her parents and sister anything about what was happening, afraid to upset them. So her family was sure that Vicky was happily married. Besides, religious relatives would have insisted on a divorce when they learned of her husband's infidelity. But after all, Vicky was in love and didn't want to break up with her husband. Leaving, she wrote Michael a touching letter in which she confessed her love for him and called the main man in her life. At the same time, she admitted that she knows about his cheating and does not want to put up with it and therefore leaves, but gives him time to think about it and will not yet file for divorce. She wrote it all by hand on paper and left it on the refrigerator with a magnet. Michael was not touched by the message or saddened by the departure of his wife, but he did not want to lose a quiet and submissive woman who always waited for him at home, fully served in the household, and tolerated any of his antics as well as peculiar predilections. That same evening, he followed Vicky to her friend's house, picking up a large bouquet of flowers on the way. Michael on his knees apologized and begged her to return to him, promising that from now on she would be his only woman. Vicky once again believed, or rather she wanted to believe, and returned to their home, a new mistress. Naturally, Michael did not leave Carrie and continued to meet with other women, but for a while he was extremely careful and even tried to come home for dinner, which his wife carefully prepared. He hid his phone, deleted correspondence, and even changed the password from his social networking page. At that time, he began to have an affair with a new young female employee of the company, Karen Wilson, not stopping the relationship with Carrie. At that time, the girl had a fiancé, and she was preparing for the wedding, but Michael began to persistently pursue her, making himself a miserable lover. He was so attracted to the new object of the hunt that after 2 months, he decided to break off the relationship with 33-year-old Carrie Hall, which he was tired of. The man told Karen a proven legend about how he is unhappy in marriage, and for the sake of her ready to leave his wife. Soon she surrendered, and between them happened intimacy right in the office, and a week after that, she broke off the engagement and waited for the lover to respond. However, Michael was not going to divorce, but also to interrupt the connection with a new mistress he did not want, and therefore just lied to her that he had already filed for divorce and moved to live in the house of his parents. Fatal blackmail. Vicky soon suspected that her spouse continued to cheat on her, and this time decided to act for sure. She took Michael's phone while he was in the shower, but could not find anything there, because he had taken into account his previous mistakes and deleted all text messages, and on the page in the social network now had a different password. Then Vicky waited until her husband fell asleep and took his work laptop, which he always carried with him, and on which, as it turned out, he did not leave his account in the social network. There, Vicky found correspondences with an already new girlfriend, in which her husband confessed his love to her, claimed that he was divorcing his wife and living with his parents. It was a real shock for her. She took screenshots of the love and intimate messages exchanged between the couple and saved them on her laptop, so that she could have proof of her husband's infidelity. Vicky also looked in her husband's wallet, where she found several folded checks for hotel rooms. In the morning, she presented all this to her spouse, and for the first time in their entire time together, she gave him a scandal. Michael was discouraged. He tried to apologize again and promised that it would not happen again, but Vicky suddenly said that she would tell his parents about everything, hoping that they would be able to talk some sense into him, since she could not do it. Michael was literally mad from such threats. He did not want his parents to know anything, and slapped his wife. Then Vicky got up and said that she would go to them immediately, and then headed for the door. Her spouse caught up with her, hit her twice in the head with a heavy jewelry box he grabbed from the dressing table, and after she lost consciousness, he squeezed her throat with his hands until she stopped breathing. The man felt no pity or remorse. He wrapped the body in a blanket and packed it into several large garbage bags, and then carried the gruesome bundle into his garage. Michael then quickly cleaned up the house, packed and removed most of his wife's belongings, and immediately called Karen, whom he invited over. They had dinner, had fun in the house, where a couple of hours ago Roberts killed his own wife, and then made love in the bedroom, where, in fact, everything happened. Ran off with her lover? The very next day, Michael informed his parents that his wife left him, having run away with another man. To do this, he personally went to their home and literally sobbed on his mother's shoulder, showing her messages from his wife, which he himself sent from Vicky's phone. The messages said that she had fallen out of love with him, met another man, and decided to live with him. Parents, as they could, consoled their son and sincerely bewildered how their sweet, kind, and religious daughter-in-law could do such a thing. In parallel with the phone of the deceased, Michael sent messages and her parents, which said that she fell in love with another, left with him, and asked for now not to bother her and give time. Naturally, the couple Smith immediately rushed to call their daughter to find out everything and hear her explanations, but the calls were constantly rejected, and in response only came messages asking to give her time. This seemed very strange to Vicky's parents, and they went to Michael's house to talk to him, but his story only raised more questions and doubts. And after they found out that Vicky was not showing up for work without saying anything to anyone, they decided to go to the police. An investigation, a gruesome discovery, and an escape. On the 1st of December 2009, Michael bought a shovel, several meters of rope, as well as rags and detergents from a hardware store. However, he did not manage to get rid of the body, because on the same day the police visited him at home. Then the police could not find anything suspicious, but Michael's behavior and story raised a lot of questions and doubts. However, the strangest thing was that they did not pay attention to the huge package in the corner of the garage during the inspection. In the house, there were no clothes, documents, and personal belongings of the missing woman, which could indicate that she had left. But Vicky's laptop was in the bedroom, and the police seized it for inspection. There, they found screenshots of Michael's correspondence with his mistresses, which Vicky had saved, and then decided to make a geolocation request to Vicky's cell phone, from which regularly came messages to her husband and relatives. And then it turned out that the phone had been in her and Michael's marital home all along. After that, law enforcers again visited the house of Roberts and conducted a more thorough search, finally unwrapping a strange package in the garage. The find shocked everyone present, but then it was discovered that Michael, who had been walking with the police all this time, disappeared somewhere right under their noses. He took with him a wallet with cash, so that several days he managed to hide without giving himself away. Arrest, trial, and conviction. When the money ran out, Michael came to one of his mistresses, whose name was Lavinia Talley, and asked to live in her house for a while. In the evening, the girl heard from the news that her lover was wanted on charges of murdering his wife, and immediately, without hesitation, reported to the police about his whereabouts. At the time of his arrest, Michael was crying and said he was innocent of anything. The man insisted that his spouse died during their intimate games when she asked to strangle her with a rope belt, and he overdid it. However, forensic experts found that firstly, the woman was strangled with her bare hands, secondly, she was attacked from the back, and thirdly, there are 2 extensive hematomas on her head received during her lifetime, which can definitely have nothing to do with intimate relations. The trial of the perpetrator began in January 2010. The defendant kept insisting that his wife's death was the result of an accident and hoped for leniency. However, the autopsy results presented by experts proved that the man in cold blood hit his wife twice on the head and then strangled her and hid the body in the garage. Michael Roberts was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. However, the court left him the possibility of applying for parole after 17 years in prison. That is, the criminal has a good chance of being released in 2027. Imagine that today we will visit a Hollywood movie studio where they shoot the best movies in the world of different genres. But instead of a movie pavilion, we will find ourselves in Wilbur, Nebraska, and our movie for today is a bloody thriller. Nebraska is the territory of the Great Plains. It is located in Tornado Alley. In spring and summer, there are often severe thunderstorms and tornadoes. Nebraska is the only tri-state that is landlocked, which means to get from Nebraska to the ocean, bay, you have to cross 3 states. Passing motorists don't like to stop on a dark country road. But a flat tire forced Michael to make a stop on a remote dark highway. He pulled over to the side of the road and got out of the car. As he walked around the car, his attention was drawn to a large black bag, the kind used for throwing out garbage, but the bag had an unusual shape. Michael returned to the car, took a flashlight from the glove compartment, and illuminated the bag. It was torn open. There was a stain on the ground around it. Something had leaked out of it. and something light-colored was flickering out of the holes. Moving closer, the man froze at what he saw. A human hand was sticking out of the bag. A call to the emergency services raised the whole town. A few minutes later, investigators arrived on the country highway and thoroughly inspected the area. They confirmed that the package they found contained human remains. The package was sent for examination, and the searchers continued to comb the surrounding area. The recovered remains were soon identified. The victim was 24-year-old Sydney Loof. Sydney Irene Loof was born on August 21, 1993 in Broken Bow, Nebraska. She grew up in Arcadia with her parents George and Susie Loof. Sydney's family moved to Neelai in 2000, at which time she was in second grade. Her mother Susie was a special education teacher, and her father George was the school principal. Sydney was always a very active child. The girl had a normal, happy childhood filled with a love of nature. She loved fishing, which her father always took her to. During her school years, Cindy played basketball and golf, where she made good progress, but developed scoliosis, curvature of the spine, forced to give up many of her favorite hobbies and put a cross on her sports career. In 2011, after graduating from high school, Sydney got a job at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. The Loofs were a close-knit family, and when Sydney had to move from Norfolk to Lincoln because of work, they all made sure to keep in touch almost every day and often met for dinner. Even though Sydney lived separately, she often returned home to her parents' house. But lately, Sydney had been struggling with depression and felt that the medications she was taking were only making things worse. Susie was very worried about her daughter and recommended a new doctor for her. He prescribed her various medications. In phone conversations with her mom, Sydney told how her inner state was getting back to normal, her voice sounding quite optimistic. She was trying to make some changes in her life and was looking for a new job. For a young woman, working in a store was not the limit of her dreams. She did not know what she wanted to become or what to do with her career, and these worries led to a rather depressive state. In November 2017, her mental state deteriorated to the point where she started taking antidepressants and sometimes allowed herself to smoke pot. Her family and friends were supportive in every way possible, but she wanted not only companionship, but also love. Being young and modern, Sydney had an interest in the female gender, so she would sometimes look for other girls on social media for dating purposes. To find a friend, Sydney used Tinder, an app that allows millions of people around the world to find, fall in love, and date. In November 2017, she found a girl named Audrey, and the girl replied to her. They began to correspond. The girls found many common interests, such as gambling, hiking, and delicious food. Already after 100 messages, they decided to meet. On November 14th, Sydney headed over to Audrey's house to Wilbur. Their first meeting went so well that Sydney was very happy. They liked each other and agreed to meet again at Audrey's house. On November 15th, Sydney worked her shift at the store and went home. She cleaned herself up, styled her hair, and did her makeup. Before going out, she took a photo and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." After the photo, she got a message to go out, with Audrey waiting for her in the car. The girls drove off. The next day, Sydney Loof didn't show up for work. But even though she had been in high spirits for the past few days because of her new acquaintance, her family was concerned when co-workers informed them that she didn't show up for work because it was nothing like their responsible Sydney. Susie spoke of her daughter suffering from anxiety and deep depression. Just days before her disappearance, Loof had discussed her deteriorating mental health with her family, who advised her to see a doctor again to take antidepressants. That was the last time Loof's family saw Sydney. The girl's parents went to her apartment and were extremely surprised that Sydney had left her favorite cat Mimsy without food or water. This was extremely unlike a caring landlady. The parents knew how much Sydney loved her cat and never left her alone for long. They were concerned and reported Sydney missing to the police. The apartment itself was locked. When the police did a welfare check of Sydney's home, they saw nothing out of the ordinary. But the family was adamant. Something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16, 2017, the 5'7" blonde was reported missing after she failed to show up at the showroom of the Menard store where she worked, at 27th Street and Cornhusker Highway. Sydney suffered from a spinal condition and walked in a different way that would make her stand out from the crowd. She was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. When testifying about the prior events before she went missing, her parents told police that she told her friend on Snapchat Wednesday morning that she had gone on a date with a woman she met online Tuesday night and planned to meet up with her again Wednesday night. Sydney's car, which she left in Northeast Lincoln, was found. Police officers said they have conducted interviews and were looking for any leads that could lead to Sydney or her trail. Loof's family distributed flyers saying she may have been abducted 40 miles southwest of Lincoln, where the latest information indicated her cell phone was communicating with a tower. The flyer also noted that there was no activity in her bank account and that her cell phone was turned off the night she disappeared. The flyers gave a description of the young woman and distinguishing features such as several tattoos, one on her arm with the words, "Everything will be great someday," a yin-yang sign under her elbow, and the word "believe" on her wrist. Anyone with information on Sydney Loof's whereabouts has been asked to contact police by phone. A huge appeal to find Sydney was launched, which included highway billboards with the girl's picture, and a manhunt was also launched on the TV news. Susie persisted in claiming that something had happened to Sydney after the date her daughter had gone on. To prove her point, she took a screenshot of a post that Sydney posted on Snapchat with her picture and the caption, "Ready for my date." Sydney's friends confirmed that she was going on a date with a woman she met through Tinder named Audrey. During the search, police reviewed Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from the store where she worked and quickly identified the person they wanted to talk to. The last time Sydney's phone rang a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, probably not far from Audrey's home, but police had no idea who she was. Authorities began searching for a woman named Audrey, the last person to see Sydney alive, but no one knew how to find her because no one knew who she was or if she had a real name. To the police's rescue came Sydney's friend Brooklyn, who decided to find Audrey herself through Tinder. She downloaded the app, found Audrey, and exchanged phone numbers with her. That's how police learned Audrey's real name. She turned out to be 26-year-old Bailey Boswell. It turned out that Bailey's apartment is within reach of the very cell tower where Sydney's phone was last seen connected to the tower. It also became known that this apartment Bailey shared with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. So who are Bailey and Aubrey? Bailey Boswell grew up in Lyons, Iowa. She grew up in a wholesome, normal family, was a friendly kid, and did well in school. Bailey had success in basketball and was an excellent runner. However, after losing her father, her life changed direction, and after graduating from high school, Bailey went down the wrong path. Bad company, alcohol, and illicit drugs came into her life. On one of the dating websites, she met Aubrey after a looking for a daddy status. Aubrey Trail had a depressing past. He had multiple fraud charges, fraudulent check fraud, and theft. Aubrey created his own cult where he called himself the Vampire Daddy. He paid women $200 a week to follow his rules. The rules were strange enough, but there were women who believed Aubrey. At the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey were ordered by the court to pay over $400,000 for fraud. They also had numerous misdemeanors on the two of them, but the couple managed to go on the run. On November 19, 2017, after obtaining a warrant, police searched Bailey and Aubrey's home. An inspection of the apartment revealed that some of the walls had been scrubbed with bleach, which was confirmed by a neighbor who had noticed the acrid smell of chlorinated substances 2 days earlier. Police actively began searching for the suspects. While on the run, they posted videos on Facebook saying they had no involvement in Sydney's disappearance and hoped for her safe return. Bailey claimed she went on 2 dates with Sydney, but dropped her off at a friend's house and never heard from her again. She said, "I just want Sydney's family to know that I'm really sorry, but I had nothing to do with it. I hope Sydney is found very soon. She's a lovely, amazing girl." It took police a few days to track down the couple, but they eventually found them at a hotel in Branson, Missouri. Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail were taken into custody. A few weeks after Sydney was reported missing, after carefully analyzing phone records and Bailey's location records, police discovered Sydney's remains. She had been dismembered. Her body had been cut into 14 pieces, and police found 13 of her body parts in black plastic garbage bags in ditches in Clay County. Some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. This is just horrific. A total of 16 crime scenes were found with Sydney's remains or personal belongings. Her car keys, driver's license, phone case were found along the highway. All the routes matched the movements of the two perpetrators. Forensics conducted autopsies on 13 body parts that were found. There were abrasions on Sydney's wrists, a bump on her head, torn earlobes, abrasions and contusions on her back. There were wounds on her body indicating that Sydney had fought for her life. The heartbreaking discovery shocked not only Sydney Loof's family and friends, but all of Nebraska. On December 11, 2017, the Loof family held a private funeral for Sydney at the Lutheran church the girl attended during her lifetime. Bailey and Aubrey were charged with first-degree murder, improper disposal of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. Aubrey also pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy, but pleaded guilty to improper disposal of human remains. Each successive deposition of Aubrey differed from the previous one. The man was constantly confused, changing the course of action and adding different actors. When Aubrey first talked to the police after his arrest, he told them about the cult he and Bailey were involved in. He talked about witchcraft and told them that he was a vampire who could fly. Aubrey portrayed himself as the leader of this cult and a vampire, and assured them that he had witches in the cult who had to kill another woman to get powers. So at one of his first court hearings, he admitted that he killed Sydney Loof, but did it completely by accident. He said that he paid her $5,000 to fulfill his intimate fantasy with 2 other women. Sydney agreed, but died accidentally during the intimate act when he accidentally strangled her with a cord. He also admitted that he disposed of the body by cutting her into pieces, as it was a ritual in accordance with his religious beliefs. He had to drain all the blood to release her soul to the gods in a sacred place and lay out her body parts to help her reincarnate faster. But this version turned out to be false. Surveillance footage provided, dated November 14th, shows Bailey and Aubrey checking into a hotel in Lincoln, not far from where Sydney lives. And then, on November 15th, they visit a home improvement store, which shows them buying a gruesome array of tools: a hacksaw, chlorine bleach, a folding saw, a stationery knife, and the bags used for Sydney's remains. On November 15th at 12:01 in the afternoon, a surveillance camera captured Sydney crossing paths with Aubrey at the Menards store during business hours, but the girl had no idea at the time who he was or how cruelly fate would play her. On June 11th, 2018, the first court hearing was held for the murder and improper burial of Sydney Loof's remains. Separate trials were ordered, but the charge was essentially the same for both. The trials were held in Lexington because attorneys argued that Bailey and Aubrey would not get a fair trial in Wilbur because of the publicity surrounding the case. The prosecution argued that Sydney was murdered. She was strangled, and the crime was a premeditated attack that was carefully planned. Aubrey and Bailey were declared ringleaders of a group that was interested in recruiting young women for intimate games. Bailey therefore used Tinder to find the women. At trial, the jury heard testimony from 3 other women who said they had been in relationships with Aubrey and Bailey at different times, and their acquaintance also began on Tinder. All of them had been involved with Bailey and had participated in intimate acts with Bailey and Aubrey. One woman said she even traveled with them after they met. She said Aubrey gave her a weekly allowance of $200 and invited her to join his cult. He called the cult members witches and said she had to torture and kill someone to join them. She testified that Bailey was called a witch queen. Another woman testified that Bailey talked in great detail about breaking her fingers and her desire to dismember the body. She liked to talk about torture. All three women who testified made it clear that both Bailey and Aubrey were involved in all the talk about torture and the crime. It is quite strange that in our modern world, there are still people who believe in the horrors of exorcism and try to assure the rest of us that they do. Talking about the investigation and the evidence obtained, the prosecution reconstructed the picture of what happened on the tragic evening of November 15, 2017. Sydney was getting ready for a date with a woman she had known for a couple days. They texted on Tinder and Bailey picked Sydney up from her apartment. They went for a ride in Bailey's car. After a while, the car stopped at Bailey's house, where Sydney was lured into the apartment. There, Bailey and Aubrey pounced on her as soon as she went inside and strangled her with an extension cord on the living room floor. The apartment was then thoroughly cleaned out by Bailey and Aubrey, a part the prosecution alleged was also pre-planned. They then cut Sydney into pieces and dumped her remains in Clay County the next day, November 16th. The court heard from their landlord, Jennifer Call, who testified that on November 16th, as soon as she drove into the garage, she smelled chlorine and the odor intensified when she entered the house. According to the medical examiner's testimony, Sydney's death was ruled a homicide, and the cause of death was asphyxiation. Toxicology reports indicated that Sydney had antidepressants in her system. The court learned that in addition to the missing organs, the part of Sydney's body that was not found was her upper left arm, the part just above the elbow and below the shoulder. Prosecutors had demanded the death penalty for both criminals, and the case would be retried if the sentence was unjust. But Aubrey, once again, denied involvement in the occult and pleaded guilty only to improperly burying the remains. At one point during Aubrey's trial, he shouted that Bailey had nothing to do with Sydney's death. "Bailey is innocent, damn you all." He then slashed his throat 3 times with a razor blade. He survived and was remanded into custody until he made a full recovery. After that, he did not attend court for several weeks. The next time he entered the courtroom was during the defense phase and only when he was scheduled to testify. When he was brought into court, he smirked and told the judge, "I'll be good." It is unusual for a defendant to testify at his own trial. Usually, defense attorneys advise the defendant not to testify because it may cause more problems for him on cross-examination. Some reveal too much, some can't answer questions straightforwardly, and some are hostile to attorneys asking questions, which creates a bad impression for jurors. But this was not unusual in Aubrey's case, as he had many interactions with police after his arrest. He had given the police his version of events, and at trial, he wanted to change his story. Therefore, the court needed to hear his new version of events. He decided to skip the rest of the trial and only returned for the last hearing with his horrible scars clearly visible when he testified in his defense. Aubrey Trail took the stand and shocked his attorneys by admitting that he had previously lied to authorities and his own legal team about the death of Sydney Loof. In a new version of the testimony he gave, he admitted that they met with Sydney in March 2017 and he paid her to participate in his illegal activities because she needed the money. He said they did not keep in touch, but in November 2017, Bailey wanted to rekindle the relationship and she contacted Sydney again. Sydney needed money, and Aubrey said that's why he was in Menards that day, November 15th. He offered her $5,000 to be part of his antique gang. The three of them ended up engaging in an intimate act later that night, and Sydney accidentally choked to death because of the extension cord they used in their games. "I don't know if Sydney had a seizure or something, but that's when she stopped breathing," said Aubrey. He told the court that there was no ritual involved in cutting up Sydney's body, and all the talk of witches, vampires, and blood-sucking was simply not true. He confessed that he only dismembered her because he couldn't put her body in the car. He said he panicked, and dumped her body in a Clay County field as soon as dawn broke on the morning of November 16th. When asked why he didn't seek help if her death was accidental, he said no one would believe him. Aubrey admitted to disposing of Sydney's body, but claimed her death was accidental when they used an extension cord during their games. At Bailey's trial, she admitted to nothing. In fact, her attorneys argued that she was also victimized by Aubrey. Her attorney told the court that when she met Aubrey, she was a vulnerable young woman. At the time, she was living alone, working as a waitress in Princeton, Missouri. The defense argued that Bailey had nothing to do with either Sydney's death or the disposition of her remains, but that again proved to be false. The cell phone that Bailey used to access her Tinder account was used near where Sydney's body parts were found, and it was through a detailed analysis of her phone and location records that the police were able to find all of Sydney's remains. The court also learned that it was Bailey who contacted Sydney and arranged to meet her. She was the one who drove to Sydney's duplex to pick her up on the evening of November 15th. The prosecution told the court that Bailey derived satisfaction from discussing acts of cruelty, and she enjoyed talking about torture with Aubrey. Evidence was presented at trial proving a planned crime. On the day Sydney was killed, Aubrey and Bailey were together at a store where they bought tools, including a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter from Home Depot. Around noon that day, Bailey sent Sydney a text message asking how her day was going. Phone records and surveillance footage show that Bailey was in the Menards parking lot with Aubrey when she sent that text message on Tinder. And although Sydney worked at Menards, it appears she was unaware that Bailey was there. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sydney another message on Tinder, alerting her that she was at her apartment and ready to pick her up soon. Phone records indicate that instead of going on a date, as Sydney believed, they went to the apartment where Bailey and Aubrey lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that as to Bailey, the evidence showed that Bailey was guilty of purchasing bleach and garbage bags to use to dispose of Sydney's body, and as such, she could be charged with aiding and abetting the improper disposal of human remains. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell was sentenced to life in prison. The Loof family had been seeking justice for 3 years, mourning and longing for their Sydney, and they awaited a judgment that gave them comfort. On July 11, 2019, it took a jury less than 3 hours to find Aubrey Trail guilty of premeditated conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and improper burial of human remains. The 3-judge panel called his crime cold and calculated. In a second phase of the trial to determine whether he should be executed, county prosecutors kept their promise and secured the death penalty for Aubrey Trail. Thus, on June 9, 2021, Aubrey Trail was executed by lethal injection. The con man, accused of a brutal crime against Nebraska woman Sydney Loof, allegedly convinced members of his cult that he was a flying, mind-reading vampire with a coven of a dozen witches who he claimed would get their powers by killing people. But thankfully, in real-life stories, justice prevails, and in our story, the trial brought the monster to the end of his trail in our world. Where does the line lie that once crossed, there's no return? How does an ordinary woman transform from a loving wife and beloved mother into a cruel murderer, capable of dividing a nation into 2 opposing groups? And how does her name become a constant topic among locals and newspaper headlines for years? Roxana Valdez could answer this question. Murderers don't stand out in a crowd, are not recognizable during dinner, and might even live under the same roof without revealing their true nature. They are indistinguishable from those who never cross that line. Thus, no one could have imagined what Roxana did on that spring evening of April 5th, 2014. And when they found out, they simply couldn't believe it. But let's start from the beginning. Little is known about Roxana's past. Despite the efforts of many Chilean reporters who competed to tell her story, they could find almost nothing about her. The only information from her criminal file was sparse. Born in a small village in the province of Punta Arenas, Chile, in 1957. That was it. Perhaps the lack of information was due to journalistic ethics, as the locals, known for their fiery temper and unique customs, might have retaliated against Roxana's relatives for her crime, potentially turning their lives into a living hell. Roxana Valdez was married to a man whose name, for reasons unknown, remains either undisclosed or unknown to the press. She had a son with him. It's clear that her marriage wasn't the dream every girl hopes for, as the couple eventually parted ways in 2011. As a single mother in a small village where jobs were scarce, Roxana faced significant challenges. In such communities, the primary occupation was growing and selling fruits and vegetables. Even the local educational institutions focused on agriculture. It was in this setting that Roxana found employment at the Don Gregorio boarding school, which trained students to become agricultural technicians. She worked as a night supervisor at the school, ensuring that students slept at night and did not engage in unruly activities. Her responsibilities didn't include the actual upbringing of the children. Roxana's son also attended this boarding school, as she worked in the fields during the day and couldn't give him the attention he needed. At the same boarding school where Roxana worked, Claudio Munoz Ramirez held the position of head of grounds maintenance. His duties often required him to work during the night, which is how he came to meet Roxana. Despite being 14 years younger than her, they found much to talk about. Roxana would spend entire nights discussing school affairs and her own failed marriage with Claudio. They had common ground in their personal lives as well. Claudio had 2 daughters whom he adored, but felt disconnected from their mother, contemplating divorce several times. However, he remained in the marriage due to a promise he had made to her late father. Over time, Claudio seemingly forgot his promise and began spending his free time with Roxana away from his family. Eventually, he made a decisive move. Without explaining himself to his wife, Claudio gathered his belongings and left their home. It was clear he went to Roxana, who happily welcomed him into her life. Their relationship progressed rapidly and effectively. Roxana let into her home a man she barely knew, with whom she had only enjoyed nighttime conversations. She seemed to overlook the fact that there were children around needing constant attention. Amidst these enjoyable and heartfelt talks, Roxana failed to notice Claudio's true nature. He was, in reality, quite temperamental, and sometimes even cruel. However, it was perhaps too early to judge who was more cruel between the two. The first serious outburst of aggression from Claudio took place within the walls of the boarding school. On a scheduled community cleanup day, students were assigned different areas to tidy up. Brooms, buckets, dustpans, and rags were distributed, everything needed for a thorough cleaning. As often happens, some students protested and refused to participate. Claudio, responsible for cleanliness but lacking any teaching experience, became infuriated with these students and threatened that, in the absence of teachers at night, he would beat anyone who didn't participate. Whether he would have followed through on this threat is unknown, but the students eventually started cleaning and later collectively complained to the principal about Claudio's threats of physical violence. The principal, displeased, asked Claudio to submit a voluntary resignation. It's important to note that the Don Gregorio boarding school was practically the only place in the area offering stable and reasonably paid employment. Claudio spent some time looking for work in fields and at fruit bases, but when it became clear his efforts were in vain, he and Roxana decided to seek a better life elsewhere, leaving her son in the boarding school to continue his education. They deemed it too risky to embark on this venture with him. To avoid dependency on employers, having been burned once already, the couple decided to start their own small business, a fruit kiosk. They moved to a favorable location, the commune of Molina, a couple of hours' drive from the Chilean capital. This place is well known for its vineyards, producing renowned wine brands exported worldwide. Roxana and Claudio purchased a kiosk near their new home, found suppliers for vegetables and fruits, and made their first steps in their small family business. Claudio handled the purchasing and transportation of the products from suppliers to the kiosk, while Roxana was in charge of sales throughout the day. Hiring an employee wasn't feasible, as it would mean additional expenses. Moreover, they feared that an employee might not monitor the perishable goods closely enough, leading to further losses. Claudio was visibly upset and even angry when he found out that Roxana was expecting their first child together. Perhaps it was a moment that required serious reflection, but Roxana, perhaps blinded by her new relationship and their flourishing business, didn't oppose her husband's view. She agreed that once the child was born, they would soon hand it over to her relatives for upbringing. However, it turned out there was no child to give away. Since that time, Claudio's behavior changed drastically. He often yelled at his wife and sometimes even resorted to physical violence. Neighbors from nearby houses, unhappy with their noisy new neighbors, witnessed this behavior many times and often called the Chilean police, the Carabineros, to intervene and calm the domestic disputes. On one occasion, when the Carabineros arrived in response to a call, they witnessed Roxana, in tears and almost half naked, running out of the house, followed by Claudio. Roxana confessed to the officers that she was a victim of systematic domestic violence, which had led to a miscarriage. She even required psychological help after the incident. However, as time passed, the grievances were forgotten, and the troubled couple, as if nothing had happened, continued to live together as before. Following the incident, Claudio should have faced criminal charges, but a compassionate Roxana decided to give him another chance, extracting a promise that it was a one-time occurrence. Claudio vowed never to repeat such behavior, but his past actions with his ex-wife suggested his words might not hold much weight. Unfortunately, history repeated itself. Claudio temporarily ceased his physical abuse of Roxana but developed a habit of leaving home at night to drink heavily in local bars. He spent considerable amounts of their family budget not only on alcohol, but also on local women of ill repute. Roxana endured her husband's behavior, believing that Claudio would settle down once they had a child together. In a sense, she was right. In 2013, Roxana gave birth to a healthy child. Claudio stopped his carousing and fully immersed himself in their business, which now needed to expand. They purchased another kiosk in a neighboring area and another vehicle for product transportation. Roxana also invested in firearms for protection as they lived and worked in less safe areas. The family's wealth increased significantly, but only on paper. Claudio reverted to his old ways, squandering money on drinking and again resorting to domestic violence against Roxana. In Roxana's testimony, she recounted the escalating abuse in her relationship with Claudio. Initially, Claudio's drinking was infrequent, but it soon increased in frequency. He would come home inebriated, accusing Roxana of imagined infidelities, leading to physical and sexual abuse. Despite her pregnancy, Claudio's actions seemed deliberately harmful, culminating in a miscarriage in August 2012 that plunged Roxana into a lengthy depression. One night, following his usual pattern, Claudio went out to a local bar and did not return home until the next morning. Roxana, used to his behavior, still worried about him. It turned out that Claudio had stolen 5 million Chilean pesos, about $6,000, which Roxana had from selling her mother's house to spend on alcohol and brothels. This betrayal shocked Roxana, as the money was for their shared business and was hidden in their daughter's room. When Claudio finally returned home late that evening, Roxana confronted him about the missing money. Uninterested in discussing, Claudio hit her and admitted to squandering all the money. This was the last straw for Roxana. Without a word, she went to their bedroom, retrieved a revolver intended for protection against local criminals, and shot Claudio in the chest. He died instantly, surprised by her drastic action. Roxana, equally shocked by her own actions, attempted to stem the bleeding from the fatal gunshot wound, but it was too late. The close-range shot from a .38 caliber bullet was fatal. Roxana's desperate act marked a tragic culmination of ongoing domestic turmoil. Roxana's testimony reveals her profound remorse and recognition of the immorality of her actions. She confesses that when she went for the revolver, her intention was not to intimidate Claudio but to kill him. She recalls the countless times Claudio abused and assaulted her, and her failure to report him to the authorities or retract her complaint out of fear. She feared being alone even before they had a child together. After shooting Claudio, Roxana's immediate concern was the potential impact on their daughter, especially if Roxana were imprisoned and the child sent to an institution. That night, Roxana decided that the best way to deal with the situation was to dispose of the body and report Claudio missing, aware that his frequent disappearances during drinking binges were known to the police. Disposing of the body was a daunting task for Roxana, a delicate woman. She decided to remove it piece by piece, First, she used kitchen knives intended for meat cutting to sever the limbs and head. This process required 5 knives, as they kept dulling. Then she boiled the dismembered parts in the largest pots she had, all while playing with her young daughter, who was oblivious to her mother's actions and her father's fate. Roxana's calculated approach to disposing of the body while maintaining a semblance of normalcy for her daughter highlights the complexity and desperation of her situation. The day after cooking and cooling the body parts, Roxana packed them into plastic containers, organizing them separately: hands, legs, head, and torso. Each container was then placed in a garbage bag. She loaded them into her car and headed to St. Lucia to scatter the bags on a vacant lot. Before leaving, she thoroughly cleaned her house with bleach. However, once in St. Lucia, she couldn't muster the courage to dispose of the bags from her car, despite finding a suitable spot. In her testimony, Roxana expressed her internal conflict. "It's strange. I had the bravery to commit this heinous crime and dismember a human body as if it were a piglet, but I couldn't bring myself to dispose of the evidence. I was nervous throughout the drive, feeling constantly watched, fearing that police would stop and search my car at any turn. This fear led to panic, even though I had a backup plan involving my daughter, pretending to rush her to the hospital if stopped. I even thought of how to pinch her to make her cry louder." Unable to discard the remains, Roxana returned home with them, hiding the bags in the garage. She cleaned her car's interior with bleach again and visited Claudio's relatives, claiming that he had stolen a large sum of money and hadn't been home for days. They merely shrugged in response. She then visited her mother and brother. Her mother was extremely worried about Roxana's behavior. She was not eating, had a glassy-eyed look, and repeatedly asked the same questions. The only question she answered promptly was about Claudio's absence, saying he went to buy goods for their store, but had a flat tire and got delayed. Returning home and alone with her thoughts and the hidden evidence, Roxana broke down. She called her brother for help. When he arrived, she confessed everything and showed him the containers. Naturally, her brother was in shock. When Roxana called her brother, she wanted to vent and share the nightmarish years she endured with Claudio, but above all, she needed his help to get rid of the containers holding the body. However, her brother refused, fearing police involvement and the possibility of being charged as an accomplice. He urged her to confess to the Carabineros, Chilean police, insisting he would do it if she didn't. Disappointed but realizing she had no other choice, Roxana complied. That night, Roxana went to the 4th police station and announced her intention to make an important statement. The officers, familiar with her, initially thought she wanted to report her troublesome husband. However, they were shocked by her confession. Roxana was immediately arrested. The news spread rapidly throughout the area, attracting countless journalists around the station. They waited eagerly to photograph Roxana as she was led out, hoping to capture a few images and, if lucky, ask her and the officers some questions. As the journalists waited, Roxana was eventually brought out. Handcuffed and in distress, she exclaimed, "I was afraid he would kill me one day," before being escorted into a police car. The case seemed straightforward. Roxana had confessed, provided evidence, and voluntarily surrendered. However, prosecutor Monica Ballesteros wanted a deeper investigation. Skeptical of Roxana's easy confession, she requested an extended arrest to conduct a forensic examination. Ballesteros aimed to prove that Claudio was still alive during the dismemberment, which would significantly increase Roxana's sentence. The judge granted a 60-day detention for further investigation. Meanwhile, Roxana's attorney, Jerolima Gutierrez, argued that Roxana acted under extreme emotional distress, possibly exacerbated by postpartum depression and chronic domestic abuse. She emphasized Roxana's cooperation and voluntary confession as mitigating factors. However, the prosecution's theory that Claudio was alive during dismemberment crumbled after forensic results. It was confirmed that Claudio died from the gunshot wound to the chest. The bullet from the .38 caliber revolver caused a heart rupture and damaged vital organs, disproving the prosecution's initial hypothesis. Given these developments, the aggravating circumstances were dismissed. Another lawyer, Juan Pablo Cardenas, who sought to make a name for himself in this high-profile case, pointed out that the firearm used in the murder was legally registered. He also noted that Roxana's first report of domestic violence to the police was filed just 20 days after the couple started living together. Psychologist Rodrigo Valenzuela, after a medical examination, submitted documents to the court indicating that Roxana was extremely mentally unstable at the time of the crime. This meant she wasn't fully aware of her actions, and her emotional instability was linked to the loss of 2 children, one in August 2012 and another just 3 weeks before the crime. Furthermore, a forensic examination requested by the prosecutor revealed that Claudio had a high blood alcohol level of 3 grams per liter at the time of his death. On April 17, 2015, after a year of various examinations, investigations, and evidence gathering, Roxana's trial began. The media, often sensationalizing tragedies, dubbed the case the Melina Cooks case, alluding to Roxana's dismemberment and boiling of her former husband. Some unscrupulous journalists seeking to attract attention to their publications even fabricated stories that Roxana had eaten part of the remains, although this was merely a product of their imagination. Roxana, aware of the media portrayal and deeply distressed by it, refused to make any statements during the trial. The prosecutors tried to influence the judge by emphasizing that Roxana committed a grave crime by Chilean standards, patricide. However, they couldn't prove that the murder was premeditated. The defense attorney, in turn, argued that his client acted in self-defense, protecting herself from a brute who had brutally mistreated her for years. The court hearing lasted several weeks, and during this time, the entire population of Chile followed the case closely. Prosecutor Monica requested a 15-year prison sentence for the accused. However, the judges, having carefully listened to the defense and the jury's opinion, sentenced Roxana to 6 years in a correctional facility with a lenient regime. Claudio's relatives, who understandably wished for a life sentence or even execution for Roxana, and were already protesting when they heard the prosecutor asking for only 15 years, were utterly dismayed by the actual court decision. They tried to deny any violence in the family and argued that Claudio, being a businessman and financially independent, could not have stolen $6,000 from Roxana. They also claimed that Claudio had confessed to them that Roxana often took out the revolver from the closet and told her husband that she would kill him one day. Claudio's sister, in an interview with the press, even tried to blame Chile as a state, arguing that it's a country where there is no justice, and the judicial system is utterly corrupt, given that such brutal criminals are given such short sentences, comparable to minor robberies. Even Giselle, Claudio's first wife, defended her ex-husband, assuring everyone that there couldn't have been any violence from Claudio's side. She had lived with him for many years, and during all that time, he never dared to lay a finger on her. Meanwhile, Roxana often caused disputes, motivated by her jealousy and possessiveness. Regarding Roxana's subsequent imprisonment, she spent only 2/3 of her sentence in the colony before being transferred to a semi-open education center in Talca for good behavior. Roxana was allowed to communicate with her daughter and was eventually released early. The press, of course, stirred up public interest in this case again, and the public was extremely outraged that the cook from Melina was released early. However, there were also those who, although considering Roxana a murderer, still justified her actions, seeing her as a victim in the whole situation. The debate over this case continues in the country to this day. Overall, this story highlights the grave consequences that can result if domestic violence is not addressed at early stages. Taking the life of one's children is not just a heinous criminal offense. Such a desperate step can be pushed by a woman's altered consciousness under strong substances or by a painful psycho-emotional state when the body cannot cope with stress. The high-profile case of Veronica Youngblood has become a vivid and horrible example of how disturbed psyche, unhealthy relationships, and constant stress can lead to irreversible consequences. Veronica committed a terrible crime, but at the trial, the young woman claimed that, despite what she had done, she had always been a good mother and wished her children only good. This story evokes both anger and pity, but to understand what exactly pushed Veronica to such a terrible and inhumane act, you need to look back a few decades and see what she had to go through. Perhaps her own childhood traumas played no small part in this, but this does not absolve her of responsibility. Veronica Youngblood's abusive childhood. Veronica Youngblood, maiden name Castro, was born in 1986 in the suburbs of Santa Rosa in central Argentina. She was the eldest of two daughters in the family and was raised with her sister Mara, who was born in 1988. The girl's childhood was poor and full of hardship, but not even hunger and lack of basic necessities was the worst. Her parents did not work anywhere, abused alcohol, and took their anger out on their eldest daughter, beating her almost daily, sometimes to such an extent that she could not walk. Grandfather also did not harbor any warm feelings for his own granddaughters, considering them extra hungry mouths that need to be fed. From an early age, Veronica got used to the fact that she had nowhere to wait for protection and support. She felt superfluous in her own family, and the only truly close person to her was only her younger sister. When the girl was 14 years old, her parents divorced and separated. Her father was not interested in the fate of his daughters, but her mother, who was actively trying to organize her personal life, did not need children. Veronica was forced to become an escort to support herself and her younger sister without any education because she saw no other way out. At the age of 15, she became pregnant, and at the age of 16, she gave birth to her first child, a daughter Sharon. She never gave her eldest daughter's father's name, and probably didn't know it herself, having gotten pregnant by one of her many clients, a follower of a strange cult. As a teenager, without support and help, the girl joined a rather strange South American religious cult called Umbanda. It was a combination of heterogeneous beliefs and cult positions, among which were the foundations of Catholicism, spiritualism, and African cults. In Umbanda, it is customary to honor spirit guides who are able to communicate with the souls of dead people. The followers of the cult also believe in reincarnation and spiritual development through various practices. Veronica, being an impressionable and driven girl, was quickly imbued with the peculiarities of this belief, and according to the memories of her younger sister, she herself began to believe that she could make contact with spirits and communicate with the dead. Veronica did talk about hearing voices and seeing dreams, and also believed that after death, the soul of each person is reborn for a better life. Most likely, such a specific religious cult was fertile ground for the development of mental illness, given Veronica's difficult childhood and her own parents' abuse of her. The other followers of the cult treated her with kindness and love, which is what she lacked the most, so she believed literally every word they told her, moving to the United States, meeting Ronald Youngblood. When exactly Veronica decided to move to the United States of America, it is not known, but it happened in the late 2000s, when she was a little more than 20 years old. Taking her young daughter, she settled in Hampton Roads, in the state of Virginia. There, the attractive young woman took a job with an escort service company. In late 2008, Veronica met a guy whose name was Ronald Youngblood. He was a few years older than her and served as a pilot in the U.S. Navy. He and Veronica first met when Ronald used the services of the company she worked for. Apparently, Ronald was immediately attracted to this young person because he himself expressed a desire to continue to communicate. Soon he insisted that Veronica left the escort, after which they began to live together. And in 2009, in one of the chapels in Las Vegas, the couple officially legalized their relationship, arranging a modest ceremony without guests. After the wedding, Veronica's life became stable for the first time, and she was not afraid to look into the future and confidently made plans. She had her own home, a caring husband with a stable job, who fully provided for her, while Veronica could be engaged in creating home comfort. But most importantly, Ronald took her daughter Sharon as his own, surrounding her with care and love. In 2013, the couple had their common child, daughter Brooklyn. The couple was over the seventh heaven from happiness, and the eldest heiress was happy that she had a baby sister, Sharon Youngblood. After the wedding, Ronald gave Veronica and her oldest daughter his last name, although officially the child he did not adopt. Nevertheless, the girl called him Daddy and reached out to him. Ronald himself tried not to deny her anything, paid attention, and engaged in the upbringing of the child. Sharon grew up quite bright, sociable, and purposeful girl. She studied well in school, had a lot of friends, was active and friendly. From an early age, she was involved in sports, was a member of the school cheerleading team, played tennis. but the girl achieved the greatest success in figure skating. Coach, who worked with Sharon, noted how easy and at ease she felt on the ice, as if in his native element. In childhood and adolescence, she regularly participated in various figure skating competitions, where she repeatedly won prizes. She was prophesied a brilliant sports career, noting the tenacity and diligence of the young figure skater, but alas, it was not destined to come true. Unstable family life. After several years of living together, the relationship between Ronald and Veronica began to deteriorate. Both spouses had difficult characters. They were excessively emotional and unyielding. If at first they managed to find compromises, then now neither of them did not want to make concessions. Moreover, the spouses began to do many things to each other for evil, because of which between them often began to erupt scandals with violent clarification of relations, mutual accusations, and insults. In addition, Ronald was very jealous and overbearing. If before the wedding he promised to forget about what his chosen one used to do, now he reminded her of it, every chance he got. He said that he pulled her out of the mud, provided for her, took her child, and now he demands to live by his rules. Family quarrels began to escalate into physical assaults, with the husband and wife taking turns to be the instigators of the fights. The police received complaints of domestic violence from both sides, but in most cases, these reports were soon withdrawn, and the spouses continued to live together. To be fair, the children were not involved in their parents' squabbles and were never physically hurt, although their emotional state can only be guessed at. In 2014, Ronald was sent to Central America, to the Republic of Honduras for duty, and his family followed him. During this period, relations between the spouses became very acute. Veronica complained to the local police that her husband was raising his hand against her, restricting her finances by blocking her card and forbidding her to use the internet and car. Ronald later said in his defense that he did so because he found out that his spouse was cheating on him. The husband thought that by depriving his wife of money, personal transportation, and the ability to communicate with her lover, he would keep her at home. As a result, Veronica filed a complaint with the U.S. Embassy and had her husband extradited from Honduras and returned to the United States. However, this incident did not affect his career, and he was soon transferred to Washington, D.C. to the main department of the country's Navy. However, relations between the couple finally soured. Breakup and ongoing conflicts. In 2016, the spouses moved to Florida, the place of Ronald's new appointment. By that time, they had already virtually separated, but continued to live together under one roof, and Ron still fully supported Veronica and daughters. By the beginning of 2017, the family moved again, this time to the small town of Oakton, which is in the state of Virginia, where the spouses began the official divorce process. But even during the dissolution of marriage, Ron and Veronica did not separate. They lived in the same house, although apparently they simply could not stand each other anymore. Both later claimed that no matter what, they wanted to raise children together, but in fact, Veronica had no source of income and could not even rent a room for herself. The issue of future custody of the children became especially acute, and Veronica realized that she would not be able to raise the children on her own because they were all completely dependent on Ronald. He also realized this and did not miss the opportunity to remind his wife of this, sometimes descending to outright blackmail, which brought the young woman to hysterics. At some point, driven to despair, Veronica decided to take a loan from the bank to have at least some of their own funds. However, as a guarantor, she specified her still legal husband without informing him. When Ronald received a call from the bank, another scandal broke out. Naturally, he refused to act as guarantor, and the actions of his wife became for him another reason to humiliate her. True, a couple of months later, the couple was finally able to agree, and the scandals between them for a while subsided. According to the court decision, they could continue to live together, and together bring up their children, while neither of them will be charged alimony. But that truce didn't last long. In the fall of 2017, Ronald filed a lawsuit against Veronica, accusing her of aggressive and inadequate behavior. He stated that the spouse smashed his smartphone, launching it into the wall, drowned in a basin of water with a working laptop, and also smashed the windshield of his car with a stone. After that, Veronica was obliged to move out and forbade her to go near Ron. At the same time, the youngest daughter, Brooklyn, was temporarily given full custody of her father until the next court hearing. 3 weeks later, the divorce proceedings were finalized, but having received a certificate of divorce, the former spouses began to live together again and, it seemed, even reconciled. Courts and custody battle. About 6 months later, the former spouses appeared in court together again, but this time they provided a multi-page agreement detailing their plan for custody of their shared daughter. All the matter is that Ronald was transferred to the state of Missouri and the former wife and children moved with him. But before Veronica wanted to officially settle a number of nuances regarding the custody of their daughter, Brooklyn. The agreement stated that Ronald would provide his ex-wife with housing that would be close to his home so they could raise their daughter together. The court approved the document in April 2018, and the move itself was scheduled for August of that year. But a month later, Veronica unexpectedly changed her decision and went to court again. The young woman turned for help to a lawyer, who had to confidently draw up and make a number of changes to the previously approved agreement. Veronica said she was doing this because of changed circumstances. By then, she had finished her nursing school training and had been offered a job in Oakton with a good salary. That way, she could more or less support herself and the girls, and there was no need to move after her ex-husband. In addition, the new job promised to help her find and pay for her own place to live. Due to her new circumstances, Veronica now sought full custody of her daughter Brooklyn, which she specified in an amendment to the agreement. The new hearing was held in July 2018, a month before the previously scheduled departure to Missouri. But the court refused to make any changes to the previously approved agreement, and the former spouses were to move to another state to share custody of their shared daughter, as previously agreed. Veronica seemed to agree with the court's decision, as she made no further attempt to challenge it. 2 weeks after the last court hearing, Ronald filed a legal notice with his new address where he would live after the move, which was less than a month away. Only a few minor details needed to be finalized, and he was on his way. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, but Sharon and Brooklyn had only days to live. Disturbing call. Toward evening, on August 5, 2018, emergency services received a disturbing call from 15-year-old Sharon. The girl was crying and gasping in pain. She begged to be saved and talked about how much she wanted to live. She said she was badly injured, and when the cameraman asked what had happened, she said she had just been shot with a gun by her own mother. According to Sharon, she and her younger sister were asleep when their mom walked into the room and shot Brooklyn. At the sound of the gunshot, the older sister woke up and was literally numb with fear. She asked her mom, "What are you doing?" Veronica replied that she was taking her daughters to God. Sharon tried to run away, but Veronica shot her in the back. With her last strength, she made it to the next room, where she locked herself in and called emergency services. The operator assured Sharon that help was on its way and asked her to hold on for a few more minutes, but then he heard the girl screaming in despair, followed by another gunshot. Then there was a frightening silence and the call was cut off. The police and paramedics arrived on the scene by 10 o'clock in the evening, and a horrifying picture was revealed before them. By this time, Ronald, who was on business in another city, had also called the emergency services, asking them to send someone to his house immediately because his ex-wife, according to him, might have done something terrible. Veronica had already called him and told him everything, but Ron refused to believe in the truth of her words. Sharon was the first to be found lying on the floor with 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest and one to the back. Amazingly, despite the massive blood loss, she still had a faint pulse and was desperately clinging to life. Sharon was quickly taken to the intensive care unit of the nearest hospital, but despite the efforts of doctors, the next day, she died. Brooklyn's breathless body was discovered in her bedroom, in her own bed. She had been killed by a single gunshot to the head. The girl's father arrived about an hour later, rushing home as fast as he could. But Veronica's whereabouts remained unknown until the emergency services received another call from one Manuel Bellows, who reported Veronica's whereabouts. Who is Manuel? Manuel was one of the lawyers the young woman consulted with in the spring of 2018 regarding custody of her youngest daughter. Veronica, as the lawyer later argued in court, immediately struck him as a rather serious, collected, and responsible young woman fighting for custody of her beloved daughters. In addition, she was very attractive in appearance, divorced, and not in a relationship at the time. The two soon hit it off, quickly developing into a tumultuous love affair. Only a few months later, Manuel noticed some oddities in her behavior, which alerted him in particular it was the religious views of Veronica and her frightening statements about the upcoming meeting with God. At the end of July, Veronica called Manuel and invited him to her home, saying that they needed to have a serious talk. When he arrived, the young woman was home alone. Her ex-husband and children were staying with Ronald's relatives. The lights were off in the house, but candles were burning everywhere, creating a romantic atmosphere, and there was a dinner for two on the table. She confided in him that she had lost the nursing position she had been looking forward to and had refused to move to another state because of it. Veronica also shocked her boyfriend with the news that she was pregnant by him. This information was later unconfirmed. Manuel did not know how to react to this, and Veronica tried to seduce him and inclined him to intimacy. According to Manuel, nothing happened between them that night because he felt a strange discomfort and threat coming from Veronica, as if his life was in danger. He asked her for time to think about how to proceed, and then hurriedly left her house. On the evening of August 5th, Manuel heard someone ring the doorbell at his house. He opened the door and saw Veronica on the doorstep. She was frighteningly calm, and there was no emotion on her face at all. Veronica asked to be let into the house, but before Manuel could do so, he saw a gun in her hands, and he was scared shitless. He said he would call the police if she did not leave immediately, but Veronica, with the same stony face, replied that he could do so since she no longer cared. She then added that she had killed her daughters, so the police were already looking for her anyway. After these words, Manuel got really scared. He closed the door and hurried to the phone. While Veronica went back to the rental car, she came in and just waited to be arrested. The arrest and the full picture of the crime. When the police arrived at Manuel's house, Veronica was sitting in the car in the driver's seat, and next to her, in the passenger seat, lay the loaded gun she had used hours earlier to shoot her daughters. The young woman did not resist. There was still no emotion on her face. In addition to the gun, 2 more full magazines were found in the car. Already at the station, Veronica confessed that she had bought the gun 10 days ago at an exhibition in order to kill her daughters and then take her own life. According to her, she decided to take this desperate step to take revenge on her ex-husband and prevent him from taking their common daughter, Brooklyn. She also added that her personal life didn't work out and she became depressed. Apparently, the eldest daughter noticed the strange behavior of her mother and suspected something wrong because a few days before the tragedy, she directly asked her if she was going to kill them. But what the mother answered her remains a mystery. In the afternoon, on August 5th, Veronica gave her daughters sweets, in which she had previously mixed sleeping pills so that the girls would not resist. When they went to their room and fell asleep, the mother took out a prepared gun, loaded it, and went to her daughters. First, she went to Brooklyn's crib, put the gun to her head, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot woke up Sharon, who didn't immediately realize what was happening, and asked her mother about it. Veronica replied that she would take her and her sister to God, then pointed the gun at her eldest daughter. But Sharon jumped out of bed, rushing to the door, and was immediately shot in the back. She managed to run to the next room and call for help while her mother tried to open the door. When Veronica did enter the room, Sharon screamed and took a second bullet to the chest. Veronica then called her ex-husband and told him what she had done and was now going to take her own life as well. She blamed Ronald for everything, saying that she hated him and that he had ruined her life. However, the young woman then changed her mind about leaving her life for some reason and went to her boyfriend's house, where she was arrested. Youngblood fully admitted her guilt, and when she was asked what punishment she would give herself, the woman said that it should be the death penalty. It is noteworthy that in the state of Virginia, Such a measure has not been practiced for a long time, and Veronica knew about it. Trial and sentencing. Initially, the defendant refused the services of a lawyer and fully admitted her guilt. But then, she abruptly changed her testimony and decided to use the help of a public defender. She later claimed that she heard voices ordering her to do this to her daughters, and she complied. Veronica also said that she had a harsh childhood, from which she remembered only beatings and hunger, and that her ex-husband had finally killed her belief that there was anything good waiting for her in life. She added that she did not want the same fate to befall her daughters. The trial took a long time because Veronica refused to leave her cell to attend the sessions. In addition, she attempted to commit suicide several times, but did so in such a way that she was saved each time and did not cause any serious harm to herself. The defense lawyer tried to convince the court that his client suffers from a mental disorder developed against the background of childhood traumas, the influence of a religious cult, and the abuse of her ex-husband. The defense lawyer also argued that Veronica was in an insane state at the time of the crime and did not realize her actions. But despite all the efforts of the lawyer, the court saw in the actions of the woman cold calculation, because she had purchased weapons in advance, fed the children sweets with sleeping pills, and then proceeded to implement her terrible plan. Her actions were not spontaneous. They could not be written off as a state of affect or a sharp aggravation of mental disorder. The final verdict in the case was handed down in March 2023. Veronica was found guilty and sentenced to 78 years in prison. In fact, this term will be a life sentence for her. It is worth noting that many people found Ronald's behavior in court strange. He did not look like a grief-stricken father, and when his former wife, sobbing, testified, he smirked. After the verdict, he only remarked that he was quite happy with the outcome. Lisa Maria Kaisa was born in 1994 in a large family where her 8 siblings also grew up. It was a large, but far from prosperous family. Parents were busy with their own problems and did not show love and care towards their children. Moreover, there were rumors that abuse and violence were rampant in the family. The story in question unfolded in the year 2020, at the very time when the whole world was consumed with the fight against COVID-19. In one corner of Ecuador, quietly and unnoticed, truly terrible events were unfolding. Here, in the small parish of Pifo, on the northeastern outskirts of Quito, the protagonist of this tragic story was born and raised. Lisa Maria Kaisa, a woman with an enigmatic gaze whose life story became a true Ecuadorian nightmare. On that unfortunate Tuesday, October 27, 2020, Lisa sent several messages to the father of her children, David. They were words full of despair, because their paths with David at that time had already almost parted. In these lines, she confessed her love for him and her unexpected new pregnancy. However, in subsequent messages, Lisa wrote that life was losing its meaning for her, and the decision to terminate the pregnancy was inevitable. Throughout the night, Lisa pleaded with David to come to her, but his refusal was resolute. His parents also urged him to stay home, and David took their advice. In the early morning hours of October 28th, neighbors in Lisa's home heard a faint cry for help. Looking out the window, they found a woman lying on the floor with signs of vomiting. The neighbors rushed to help her, immediately calling emergency services. The doctors and police arrived and found Lisa in a critical condition, but still alive. After administering first aid, she was immediately hospitalized. However, in the house, her children, a girl of 5 and a boy of 9, were found unconscious. The doctors were unable to help them. Their little hearts had stopped beating at that point. Authorities learned the identity of the children's father and contacted David Acosta, who, upon learning of the tragedy, immediately arrived on the scene accompanied by his father. He was informed that Lisa was in the hospital and his children were found without signs of life. After several days of fighting for life in the hospital, Lisa finally regained consciousness. By that time, the investigators, guided by their findings, had presented the prosecutor's office with sufficiently convincing arguments to issue an arrest warrant for this mysterious woman. When she was released from the hospital, she was immediately transferred to a social rehabilitation center. The authorities insisted that Lissa undergo a psychological and psychiatric evaluation, as her state of mind required further investigation as part of the upcoming trial. Lissa ended up in a rehabilitation center, and doctors and psychologists took up their work. In a conversation with a criminal psychologist, Lissa opened up about her difficult childhood, where her parents fought and abused each other and their children. Her childhood had a noticeable impact on her state of mind, and moments of quarrels and her parents' divorce became an integral part of her memories. Such a childhood forced Lissa to go to work from the age of 11 to be able to study. The girl strived to escape from her dysfunctional family and build her future in a different way. The expert report also indicated that Lissa had been abused. She talked about how, after several years of marriage, David, her husband, changed dramatically. He began to humiliate his spouse and then to raise his hand against her. On the day of the tragedy with the children, investigators working at the scene found several glasses with liquid residue on the table. These finds later revealed traces of epilepsy pills belonging to one of the children, as well as other chemicals requiring identification. Police officers thoroughly searched the house, and after noticing a strange odor in the kitchen, noticed a suspicious area under the utility room. They broke down the barrier and found a lifeless body wrapped in a blanket, with characteristic signs of having been there for a long time. Later, further investigation revealed that the discovered body belonged to Jaime Yanchaguano, a 28-year-old who had been in contact with Lissa. Jaime had been reported missing by his family days before the gruesome discovery. According to Rosa Yanchaguano, Jaime's sister, he was last seen on October 18th. Rosa told investigators that after her brother disappeared, Lissa called several times inquiring about him. Lissa claimed to have received a text message from Jaime in which he wrote how some illegal substance traffickers were holding him by force and demanding a ransom of $8,000. In doing so, she strongly cautioned Jaime's family against contacting the police. It became a key point in a complex investigation that required detectives to not only solve the tragedy, but to find out if there were any other hidden victims in the story. During her interrogation, Lissa said that in 2020, while working in a kuti factory, she met Jaime Yanchaguano. According to her, he became just a friend. Lissa sought to return to her husband, who was allegedly going to blackmail Jaime to get money from him. David made it clear to his wife that if she did not help him, he would divorce her. Later, David handed Lissa a white powder and told her to slip it into Jamie's food. When the task was completed, Jaime fell asleep and never woke up again. Realizing what had happened, Lissa tried in desperation to get her husband back, but all was unsuccessful, so she swallowed the same poison and gave it to her children. However, it did not have the expected effect on her, and Lissa turned to her neighbors for help, trying to save herself from the same horror that had befallen her children. After her testimony, investigators launched an investigation, but no evidence of David's involvement in the events was ever found. No one close to the couple could have predicted that Lissa Maria and David Acosta's fate would lead them through such a difficult ordeal. When they met, Lissa was only 16 years old and still in high school. She was a dreamy and romantic girl, and David was a strong and determined young man. Soon their friendship developed into strong feelings, and this led to Lissa's unexpected pregnancy. Although the young people's families did not approve of their relationship, David's parents always supported their son and welcomed Lissa into their family. In difficult moments, David's family became a true support for the young couple. Inviting Lissa to live with them, they made every effort to make sure she finished high school. When Lissa turned 18, the lovers got married. 2 years later, the young family was waiting for the appearance of a second child, a little daughter. David's parents decided to provide the young couple with their own housing. They gave Lissa and David a separate apartment, which became for them a corner of family happiness. But over time, the couple's relationship began to deteriorate. It was obvious that both spouses sinned of cheating, which led to mistrust and disappointment. Boundless love, which seemed unshakable, began to weaken. To make matters worse, Lissa complained of psychological abuse from David, which led her to seek help from the police. Eventually, she was granted a protective order, and David was forced to leave the family home. It was at this point that Lissa began to use her position and blackmail David, demanding money for the opportunity to see their joint children. The beginning of September 2020 brought an unexpected challenge into Lissa's life that drastically changed her daily routine. The young mother discovered that her oldest son was suffering from seizures, and in desperation, she went to the emergency room at Baca Ortiz Hospital. After stabilizing the baby's condition, the doctors decided to conduct a series of tests, revealing a focal form of epilepsy, a severe disease that affects a specific part of the brain. The doctors urged Lissa to undergo additional tests, including MRI scans, and to consult with specialists as soon as possible. However, the mother, as if ignoring the seriousness of the situation, decided not to follow these recommendations. A month later, the situation was repeated. Lissa was back in the emergency room with her son suffering from the same symptoms. After reviewing the boy's medical history, the doctors discovered that the mother had somehow failed to fulfill the prescriptions given to her earlier. No tests had been taken, consultations with specialists had not taken place, and it seems that the son had not received the necessary treatment. The doctors, concerned for the child's welfare, once again reminded Lissa of the importance of following medical advice. They warned her that ignoring the doctor's advice could lead to legal consequences, as she could be putting her son's health and well-being at risk. However, this time too, Lissa disregarded the doctor's warning. A couple weeks after discovering her son's illness, she decided to call David. The serious tone in her voice worried David. She informed him that a social worker would be coming to see her shortly to discuss their son's diagnosis and retirement. On the day of the appointment, David showed up, but the social worker was long gone. To brighten the waiting time, Lissa offered him a drink. However, as David drank the drink, he suddenly felt unwell. His condition was worsening, and the social worker had not shown up, so David decided to go home to get something to deal with his discomfort. The next morning, David woke up in a terrible state. He could barely speak because his tongue was numb, every step caused discomfort, and his eyes hurt. His parents insisted on calling an ambulance. David was taken to the hospital where he spent several days. Tests revealed the presence of a psychoactive substance in his system, but given that he hadn't used anything of the sort, David began to speculate how this could have happened. Eventually, he speculated that perhaps someone had deliberately slipped him some substance in a public place. David was grateful for his life and realized that what had happened could have ended much worse. In early October 2020, Lissa made the decision to hire a nanny for her children. Her cousin Patricia recommended her friend Bertha, a responsible 48-year-old woman looking for work. On Monday, October 5th, Bertha arrived at the young mother's house. Lissa urged her to take a pill that she said helped prevent infection with the COVID-19 virus, an epidemic of which was at its height at the time. Claiming that it was a highly effective natural remedy, Lissa convinced Bertha to swallow the medicine and enter the house. They sat down to discuss the babysitter's childcare duties. A few minutes later, Bertha began to feel sick. She felt a headache, her stomach began to upset, and eventually she vomited. A short while later, Patricia showed up. It turned out that she had called her cousin repeatedly, but Lissa didn't answer, which alerted Patricia. She decided to check what had happened and immediately went to her house. Upon entering, she found Bertha lying on the couch, who was practically fainting already. Lissa shared with her cousin what had happened and expressed concern. Learning that Lissa still had not called an ambulance, Patricia immediately did so herself. After a while, doctors arrived and sent Bertha to the hospital. The condition of the victim managed to stabilize. Doctors diagnosed poisoning with a toxic substance, which often happens when using various medications. Doctors decided that Bertha did not tolerate some component of the composition of the pills from COVID-19. A few months before this tragic incident, in June of the same year, Lissa's former buddy, Mark Escanto, had died of poisoning. At the time, the cause of his death had gone unnoticed, but now, given all these strange circumstances, Mark's case required additional attention. Investigators scrutinized the deceased's home and found Lissa's fingerprints on the glasses used the night before Mark's death. This fact added new evidence to the investigation, pointing to Lissa's possible involvement in the incident. But suddenly, a new accusation was made against Lissa. Her own family made a shocking report to the police. It turns out that on September 2nd, The family had a family gathering where Lissa offered to let everyone taste a drink of her own making. 7 brothers and sisters of the young woman, as well as their parents, drank the unknown drink and immediately felt sick. Fortunately, no one died, but the 56-year-old mother suffered a stroke.
Lissa's father claimed that while the relatives were seeking medical attention, his daughter stole $1,300 from the house. Now, the investigation included not only crimes against the children and a former boyfriend, but also an incident that jeopardized the lives and health of her own family members. As it turned out, that wasn't all. Investigators encountered another strange event. In May of that year, Jose Luis Erazo, a friend of Lissa's, was found dead in his home. A few days before, Jose had suddenly disappeared, and neighbors soon smelled a rotting odor, prompting them to contact the authorities. An examination of the body initially revealed nothing suspicious and was ruled a heart attack. But one of Jose's sisters suspected something strange and hid a bottle of alcohol found in the refrigerator. In addition, Jose's family noticed that some items were missing from the house. It turned out that Lissa and Jose were friends, and when the guy died, the alleged killer contacted his relatives by phone. With a distraught voice, she stated that Jose owed her a large sum of money, and she had to contact the family to repay the debt. This cunning plan did not work, and a little later Lissa called Jose's family again, changing her voice to conceal her identity. Identifying herself as Jose's friend, she claimed that she was pregnant by him and now had to apply for child support. Although Jose's family did not believe these stories, Lissa was not about to give up and made a third attempt to deceive them. She said she knew who was responsible for Jose's death and offered to meet to uncover the details. Had she not been arrested on charges of killing her own children in Jaime, the list of victims might have gotten longer. When the media reported the arrest of Lissa, who had poisoned 3 people, Jose's relatives understood. They immediately reported their suspicions to the authorities, and Jose's body was exhumed for forensic examination to determine the true cause of death. The relatives were not mistaken. Traces of poison were found in the remains of the deceased. On December 22, 2020, a hearing was held for Lissa Maria Kaisa for the murder of her 2 children, whose names and photos were classified, and for Jaime Yanchaguano. The trial was conducted virtually due to restrictions related to the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Lissa had been in contact from a social rehabilitation center. The prosecutor's statement said that Lissa gave her children a toxic mixture of insecticides and anti-epileptic drugs. In interrogations, she claimed that she had grown desperate and could not leave her children with her husband David, who did not care for the children. In fact, she admitted that she wished them dead. At the end of the hearing, the judge issued the defendant a court pass and ordered her remanded into custody pending trial. The children's trial next took place in 2021 at the Pichincha Provincial Court. The prosecutor presented a set of evidence to prove Lissa's guilt. Among them were statements by David, who revealed the content of messages the wife had received on the eve of the tragedy. In one of the messages, she claimed that she would take with her what belonged to her, referring to the children. She said she didn't know where her children and herself would go, heaven or hell. But now she felt as if she was in hell. Lissa added that she doesn't expect her husband to forgive her because she knows he hated her, and now he will hate her even more. David also spoke about his unstable relationship with his wife. At the hearing, the defendant's reconstructed testimony was presented, stating that she took 2 pills that day, called for help, and then passed out. According to the reconstruction conducted by the prosecutor's office, the daughter died while still in bed, and her older brother tried to take a few steps to call for help, but fell and died. The conclusion of the forensic medical examination was extremely clear. The children died as a result of a premeditated crime. The deaths were the result of suffocation caused by pulmonary edema and intoxication caused by a mixture of epilepsy medication and other unspecified substances, presumably insecticides and disinfectant. The prosecution also charged Lissa with the death of Jaime Yanchaguano, whose body was found bricked up in the kitchen.
The perpetrator was also suspected of attempting to kill David and members of her own family. The hearing raised the issue of Lissa's irresponsible attitude to her son's health after being diagnosed with localized epilepsy. The mother ignored instructions for further tests and follow-up examinations, and when the boy was hospitalized again, his condition was exacerbated by her own mother's negligence. Warnings from medical professionals did not change her attitude toward her son's treatment, leading to a threatened termination of her parental rights. Lissa's mental health investigations revealed her to be highly emotional and environmentally dependent. She sought constant attention and understanding from others and experienced severe anxiety when events did not unfold according to her plan. She also exhibited a tendency to self-harm. She attempted to say goodbye to her life at least 3 times, but was unsuccessful each time. Witnesses described her as insecure, attachment-seeking, exhibiting schizoid and erratic behavior. The findings of the psychological analysis also emphasized that on the day of the tragic events, Lissa acted with full awareness of her actions. After a long trial that lasted 10 months, Lisa Maria Kaisa was found guilty of the crime against her children. The Pichincha Provincial Court sentenced her to 34 years and 8 months imprisonment. In addition to this, she was ordered to pay David a compensation of more than $20,000. It was noted in the press that Lisa remained calm throughout the proceedings and only showed emotion when her children were mentioned. The Jaime Yanchaguano murder case, which began in August 2021, appeared to be unfinished. New details were revealed during the court hearings. Lissa admitted giving her friend a white substance mixed with alcohol, but claimed she got it from David. However, the investigation proved otherwise. According to a psychiatrist who interviewed Lissa, she did not want to take Jaime's life. She wanted to intimidate his family so she could then extort money. She did demand $8,000 as ransom. Experts called the plan disorganized, which ultimately led to the crime. In addition, forensic tests revealed that it wasn't that simple. Jaime was found to have poison in his system, and the cause of death was strangulation. The body was found with a shattered ribcage and wire around the neck. Lissa claimed that after her friend died, she decided to bury him under a back room and cement him in. The store owner's testimony confirmed that Lissa bought building materials during the days of Jaime's disappearance. After the parties' arguments, the prosecutor's office requested a new trial in April 2022. At that trial, an additional charge of extortion was filed. Lissa called Jaime's relatives, claiming he was being held by a group of gangsters, and demanded $8,000 for his release. The defense relied on the lack of conclusive evidence that Lissa was involved in Jaime's murder. Nevertheless, she was found guilty and received a 22-year prison sentence, as well as a sentence to pay $5,000 to the victim's mother. While Jaime's trial was underway, the investigation of Mark Escanto and Jose Luis Erazo, Lissa's alleged victims, was nearing completion. Mark Escanto was 48 years old, and tests conducted after his death revealed traces of the same substance that Lissa had given to her children. In addition, Mark was found to have severe inflammation of the stomach. The family's lawyer claimed that Lissa met Mark, offered him a beer, and then put the poison in the drink. A glass with Lissa and Mark's fingerprints, as well as a swab containing the woman's DNA, was provided to authorities. Alleged motives for the murder included jealousy and money. It is also known that Lissa had asked Mark to help her financially, and there was evidence that he loaned her at least $120. Mark was Lissa's first known victim. The final outcome of this case, as well as that of Jose Luis Erazo, remain unknown. They may not have been reported in the press, or the investigation may not yet have reached the stage of being formally charged and brought to trial. At the time of her brutal crimes, Lissa Maria was only 26 years old. Her high-profile criminal case has become one of the most horrific and disturbing in Ecuador's recent history. These crimes made her known throughout the country as Doña Venado. Lissa Maria Kaisa is recognized as a serial killer in Ecuador. Her victims have endured terrible suffering, and their relatives have suffered unbearable pain. The charges include 5 murders and 9 attempted murders. Under Ecuadorian law, the maximum sentence she could face is 40 years in prison. That means Lissa could be released when she turned 70 years old. It is still unclear what motivated Doña Venado to commit such horrific acts. Was her act the result of resentment for not getting what she expected in life? Many speculate that the motive was money, and in David's case, Lissa acted out of a lust for revenge, which led to the tragedy with her children. The most horrific part of this story is not only the number of victims left in the path of Doña Venado, but also the fate of two innocent children who could not have guessed that their mother, who gave them life, would take it away so absurdly and cruelly. Martin Gardner sat on the porch of his desolate home, clutching a photo album he had received years after the tragic day. That album had become a symbol of his loss, a living testament to a terrible tragedy. Martin's gaze stopped at the pictures of his small and innocent children, Talen, Sai, Savi, and Yazi. These pictures were all he had left of his happy days. As he looked into their faces, he could almost hear their children's voices filling this house with laughter and warmth once upon a time. Martin's first child was Talen, who was only 4 years old. To his father, he was the light of his life. The man dreamed of spending all his free time with him, teaching him everything he knew, and drinking beer with him in the future, when Talen would be a real grown man, and Martin himself would be gray and important. Little Saya, who was only 3 years old, always ran to her father when he came home from work, remembering to take her cloth doll with her. She always asked Martin to give her and her doll a kiss before she went to bed. This always brought a smile to her father's face, and he performed this sweet ritual with seriousness and respect. Savi, a 2-year-old girl, was silent and intelligent. She loved to flip through books and watch animal movies. Martin often took her on his lap and read her favorite stories to her. He saw in her the potential of a future intelligent and serious woman who would achieve great heights in life. And Yazi was the youngest, still a very tiny baby with deep black eyes. When Martin looked into her eyes, he saw a vast world there. Those eyes were exactly like those of her mother, Shenia Gardner. Martin remembered how happy he was that she had given him this beautiful world full of love, comfort, and children's laughter. But that world was shattered one fateful day. Shenia Gardner was born in the late 80s in Memphis, the American state of Tennessee. Little is known about her early years, other than the fact that she was the daughter of Eleanor Snodgrass, who once inhabited the cozy cabins of Madison, Alabama. Shenia's childhood and youth flowed as routinely as any other girl's. At that time, she was a young brunette with curly hair, slender and beautiful. The girl was always surrounded by loyal friends and displayed bright talents. Shenia was filled with a true creative spirit. She had a unique gift of composing songs. Music was her passion, and singing was her way of expressing herself. Her vocal abilities caught the attention of the locals, and she became a local celebrity. However, singing was only one of her many hobbies. Shenia was fascinated by the world of fashion and photography. She looked great in front of the camera and could turn everyday moments into works of art. Despite all these colorful hobbies, inside Shenia was a woman full of charity who always found time for religion. She often attended church and carefully cared for her family. Everything in Shenia's life seemed set and promised a bright future. Shenia was only 14 years old when she met Detrail Clayton. It started with a casual introduction through mutual friends. They immediately found common ground and became friends. By the time they grew up and graduated from high school, their relationship became more serious, and the young people officially became a couple. Shenia and Detrail spent a lot of time together. Everyone considered them serious and stable young people. However, there were some questionable episodes in their record. Both were seen in minor offenses, such as traffic violations or disorderly conduct on the streets. In 2008, things got more serious. Detrail was accused of assaulting a woman, and although it was done unintentionally, he was facing serious punishment. The guy got lucky, and soon all charges against him were dropped. Shenia and Detrail did not formalize their relationship, but they lived together. In the same year 2008, the couple had a son who was named Dallin. Shenia became a caring mother, not only to him, but also to Detrail's 2 children from his previous relationship. Sonia Clayton, Detrail's mother, always saw Shenia not just as a woman in love with her son, but as part of her family. Shenia was noted for her devotion and care for her children, which made her special in Sonia's eyes. However, the lovers' relationship was not a long one, and little is known about what exactly happened between them. However, even after the breakup, they continued to maintain some distant communication. To Detrail, Shenia remained a good wife and a caring mother. When Dallin was just 2 years old, Shenia was involved in a small incident. It was a minor infraction, perhaps a parking ticket or a minor argument of no great importance. It was also insignificant compared to what the future held for her. Marrying Martin Gardner was a new phase in Shenia's life. Fate had led her to this man who appeared to bring joy and stability to her life. Shenia, on the other hand, won Martin over with her kindness and love for children. In her eyes, he saw an ocean of feminine tenderness and wisdom. Their story developed rapidly. In September 2013, they decided to start their life together and moved into an apartment complex in southeast Shelby County. The wedding was just the beginning of a new phase of their life together. Shortly after the celebration, they had their first child, baby Talon. And in 2014, little Saya was born into the world. Soon, 2 more girls, Savi and Yazi, came along, making their big family even happier and busier. In total, Martin and Shenia had 4 children together, as well as 1 child from the young woman's previous relationship. For the young mom, children always came first, and she enjoyed working part-time at the children's hospital. Moreover, she was actively involved in a center that raised funds to help children. It was her calling, and she gratefully dedicated her life to helping those in need on the cusp of a terrible event. Friday, July 1st, 2016. An ordinary day that didn't portend anything out of the ordinary. Around noon, Shenia was on the phone with her husband, Martin. Her voice was calm, as it usually is. She told her husband that she was going to watch a movie with the kids. There was nothing to indicate that something terrible was going to happen on this ordinary day. And then, at that moment when the spouses were having a quiet conversation, an incomprehensible madness began to happen. Suddenly, Shenia changed. She took a kitchen knife and went into the living room. There, she attacked her own 6-month-old daughter, Yazi. The defenseless little girl who couldn't fight back was caught in a terrible trap. Her life was cut short in an instant at the hands of her most loved and closest person. Dallin, the oldest of the children, he was only 7 years old, witnessed this nightmarish scene. A terrible tragedy played out before his eyes, for which he was too young to understand. The boy thought only one thing: he must do something to save his younger brother and sisters. Panicked and desperate, he ran out of the house. Shenia didn't stop there. The young woman followed her son out of the house, armed with a knife, ready to continue her nightmarish plan. She rushed after Dallin, but the man, terrified and desperate, screamed so loudly that he attracted the attention of the neighbors. A couple of neighbors heard his screams and quickly went outside to see what was going on. They found themselves witnessing a nightmare that did not settle in their nines. Realizing that Dallin was being watched, Shenia went no further. However, the whole horror was not over yet. Shenia returned to the house where Savi and Talon were waiting for her. Distraught, she went up to the bedroom where the little ones were. It was the last moments of their innocent lives. Meanwhile, those who witnessed the nightmare didn't waste a second. They quickly called emergency services, asking for help and rescue for little Dallin and his younger siblings. At that moment, none of them could have imagined the tragic consequences that awaited this peaceful street. Sheriff's personnel arrived on the scene and were confronted with an eerie scene. Inside the home at 7449 Southern Hill Drive, they found a bloodied Shenia and her 4 children lying motionless, bereft of life. The sight left everyone in shock. Shenia sat with her cell phone in her hands. She slowly dialed the number of Martin, her husband. Her voice sounded quiet and cold as she confessed to killing her children. The tragedy that had unfolded in their lives was the horrific event that would forever be remembered in this quiet neighborhood. By the time the prosecutor's office and special unit arrived on the scene, it was all over. There was only an eerie silence in the house that had once been the place of the happy Gardner family. Blood and horror lurked in every corner. The investigators had a bloody knife in their possession, silently bearing witness to the gruesome incident. Chaplains arrived to help and were shocked by what had happened, as well as specialists ready to assist Dallin. The horror he had endured required immediate intervention. While the necessary information was gathered and investigations were underway, law enforcement asked residents to stay inside their homes and not go outside. Some did not need this request. They still felt fear and uncertainty. Their home seemed to be the only safe place. A major operation forced sheriff's officials to close off access to the apartment complex, including the golf area and country club. As for Shenia, she was apprehended and taken into custody without bail. Her trial was immediately scheduled for July 5th. Society could not remain indifferent to these horrific events unfolding in the life of Shenia Gardner. No matter how monstrous she was portrayed, she was a mother and a partner who radiated love, care, and joy, according to Michelle Jamont, her co-worker. Michelle vigorously defended Shenia on social media, speaking out about the unfairness of the allegations. She also brought up an important aspect: postpartum depression. Cases like this have sparked discussion, and Dr. Joel Reisman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, confirmed that the killing of children by their own mother is rare and usually accompanied by mental illness. He also pointed out the lack of mental health funding in the state, which leaves many families without the support they need. Dr. Diane Barnes, a psychology and postpartum health specialist, explained the difference between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis, emphasizing that they are completely different conditions with different symptoms. And while Shenia's exact condition required further investigation, Dr. Barnes doubted that women in a state of postpartum depression would commit such acts. She leaned toward the idea of psychosis. The investigation in Shenia Gardner's case was arduous. Her defense attorney, Craig Morton, became her defense attorney, but he chose not to comment on the case to the media in the early stages, believing it was too early for such discussions. On July 5, 2016, at the court hearing, Shenia remained silent, appearing only via video link. Judge Lois Lambert asked her questions, but the young woman did not utter a single word. After the trial, Shenia was sent to the Mental Health Institute. Shenia's next of kin came to the courthouse, but declined to comment to reporters. Morton's attorney and prosecutor Jennifer Nichols planned to file a motion to preserve evidence in the case, including information gathered from social media. January 2017 brought formal charges against Shenia on 4 counts: aggravated child abuse, aggravated murder with a deadly weapon, aggravated child abuse, and child neglect. The mysterious and gruesome investigation continued, and the community was left waiting for justice and answers to many questions. The hearing included testimony from Shenia's loved ones. On that fateful day, Sonia, Detrail's mother, was undoubtedly shocked to learn of the terrible tragedy. She immediately arrived on the scene in a desperate search for her grandson Dowan. Sonia maintained that what had happened had nothing to do with the young woman she had once known. She expressed her belief that something supernatural, perhaps of a diabolical nature, was behind it all. As time passed, however, and the initial shock began to wear off, Sonia began to speculate about possible motives. She speculated that perhaps the young couple was in the process of divorce. For fear of being alone, caring for 5 children, Shenia might have come to the terrible decision to end it all. But despite these reflections, Sonia found it hard to believe. To her, the Shenia she had once known was far from a person capable of such a horrible act. Detrail, Dowan's father, also refused to believe in Shenia's guilt. He admitted that although he was never his son's guardian, he was always able to visit him after his relationship with Shenia ended. But November 2014 was the last time he saw his son. He noticed that each time Shenia became more and more radical in her actions and decisions. Every attempt he made to contact his son failed, and he was simply not allowed to be involved in his life. But in fact, Shenia's friends and family had long ago noticed that a completely unexpected upheaval had taken place with her. The young woman began to experience a strange discomfort, but gradually developed into deep anxiety, paranoia, and even worse, panic attacks. Her behavior became erratic and unpredictable, and many people began to suspect that it might be related to postpartum depression. This came as a real shock to those around her, as Shenia seemed to be a strong and dependable woman. She had always been the one in control, but now she seemed to have lost her footing. Her sudden change in behavior made many people wonder why this tragic situation happened. The first signs of strange behavior began in March 2015, and none of her friends and family could figure out what was going on. One day, Shenia left work early and picked up her children. With 5 children in the family car, she headed down an unknown road leading away from their home. At the time, her husband Martin assumed that his wife had gone for a walk, and to unwind in some park. This was quite typical of her daily routine. However, as the hours passed, she never returned home. Very disturbed, Martin decided to put out an APB for his wife. At the wheel, with 5 children in the cabin, Shenia headed east and traveled more than 74 miles separating Memphis from Corinth, but she didn't know anyone here, and she had no apparent reason to go there in particular. She was later found in the emergency room of St. Francis Hospital, but police never revealed how or why she ended up there. Shallow cuts were found on her neck and one of her wrists. If she was trying to take her own life, her only witnesses were her children, but they were too young to realize what was happening. Shenia was eventually returned home by authorities, but after that, even more bizarre behavior began. She told Martin that someone was threatening her and their family. Her husband was shocked, as Shenia provided no details about who it might be or why, and there were no prior instances of such threats. Also, when Shenia was with family and friends, she started complaining about her work and workload. She claimed that she felt very bad about it. Soon, she began to claim that some of her co-workers wanted to harm her. Despite these abnormalities, Shenia showed no signs of abuse or violence toward her children or others. The long wait for trial was not an easy one, and it was severely delayed due to the numerous psychiatric evaluations the defendant had to undergo. Added to this came the COVID pandemic, which only added to the length of the trial, longer than anyone expected. In 2021, the non-jury trial finally began. The defense focused its strategy on Shenia's mental illness argument. The prosecutors acknowledged her said mental illness, but they insisted that the defendant was still capable of understanding the difference between right and wrong and was aware of the illegality of her actions. Finally, a Shelby County Criminal Court judge, James, rejected the defense, and in December 2021, Shenia Gardner was found guilty of all charges against her.
In February 2022, Shenia, 34, appeared in court for sentencing, with her husband Martin also in attendance. Judge James sentenced her to life in prison for each count of murder, as well as 15 years for each additional count of child abuse and neglect. Shenia will only be able to apply for the possibility of parole after serving a total of 51 years in prison. Given the 5 years she spent in prison prior to sentencing, Shenia will be eligible for parole in approximately 46 years, when she will be 80 years old. After sentencing, the prosecutor stated that he agreed with the decision because it was consistent with their desire to achieve justice for Martin and his children. In turn, Martin expressed some relief upon learning that Shenia would never be able to harm any children again. Sonia, Dallin's grandmother, stood among people, including neighbors, family members, and law enforcement officers, during an evening vigil at the apartment complex where the family lived. In remembrance of the innocent victims, those who came to say goodbye held red and white candles and prayed several times for the souls of the departed. The Reverend Pastor of the Baptist Church noted that the vigil was the beginning of a healing process for the entire community, because in the end, the only thing in the hands of those present was a desire to support the surviving baby and his father and help them through this difficult moment. DeTrail did not attend the memorial ceremony. On his behalf, Sonia told the media that he was too overwhelmed with anger to show up for the ceremony. The president and CEO of the Children's Hospital where Shenia worked also expressed their condolences on behalf of everyone at the hospital. Martin's colleagues set up a social media account to help him with funeral arrangements for his 4 children. During the ceremony, while saying a few words about his children and family, Martin showed incredible fortitude and nobility in his words. In his final speech, he emphasized that his home was happy when his children and Shenia were there, and that this is how it will remain in his memory forever.
This story is about a woman whose life is filled with lies from beginning to end. You will learn how the unscrupulous deceiver ends up in pursuit of big money and how many human destinies it can affect. Michelle grew up in the town of Hurst in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas. She had a younger sister, Laura. The girl's mother left home in search of a better life, so the upbringing of children was the father. It was not easy for a man to raise 2 daughters alone. He survived on occasional earnings at a construction site and often relied on alcohol. In search of easy money, he repeatedly thought up and implemented devious plans for profit. He He would take a job at one factory or another and deliberately injure himself in order to obtain insurance money compensation. The fraud scheme worked, but not for long. With the help of CCTV cameras at one of the workplaces, the scheme was uncovered, and Michelle and Laura's father was sent into custody. Michelle grew up in a world of lies, deceit, and manipulation from childhood. This was her normal life, from which she wanted to escape by any means possible. But it is impossible to escape from herself, because lies have already become a part of her life, and she simply did not know how to live differently. The girl dreams of growing up faster to get out of the hated poverty. At the age of 15, Michelle looks very spectacular, a petite brunette of athletic build. She attracts a lot of interest from guys both of her own and older age. Even then, Michelle realizes that with the help of her feminine power and charm, she can easily manage to manipulate any men in her environment in order to get what she wants. So in her life begins a series of love relationships with different men. At the age of 17, Michelle drops out of school and marries for the first time to 16-year-old Kenneth O'Brien. She informs the boyfriend that she is expecting a baby. Kenneth, taking full responsibility for his young wife and future child, enlists in the army. The couple moves frequently. 2 more children are born to them in this marriage. One city is replaced by another. Temporary housing of the military was not the limit of Michelle's dreams. Such a life does not suit her, and after 5 years, she leaves, naming the reason for divorce beatings and cheating on the part of her husband. Michelle returns to her native Hearst. In front of relatives and friends, she appears as a victim of domestic violence and receives the necessary support and begins to organize her life anew. After a while, she falls in love with her former classmate Brandon. The young man is head over heels in love with Michelle and gladly accepted her 3 children. The lovers prepare for the wedding. However, on the eve of the wedding, Michelle infuriates Brandon. It turns out that the girl did not divorce her first husband. She was very afraid to talk to him about divorce because of the abuse, so she did not send the documents. With the help of a lawyer, this issue was quickly settled and the couple was able to marry in 1994. At first, family life flowed calmly and measured. Brandon was engaged in the development of his IT company, and Michelle worked as a dental assistant. But quiet family life was not the limit of Michelle's dreams. She has always needed more. She starts bringing home all sorts of dental equipment and supplies. The cash doesn't fit in her purse. Brandon suspected something wrong. Eventually, Michelle was caught stealing. It was only by luck that a trial was avoided. But Brandon's trust issues with his wife were just beginning. Responding to neighbors' reports that cars were frequently arriving at the house while he was at work, Brandon installed a tape recorder in several rooms of the house. Listening to the tape, he heard various men visiting their home throughout the day. Brandon does his own little investigation and learns that the reason for the divorce in Michelle's first marriage was her numerous infidelities, not her husband's beatings, as she told everyone. Brandon's patience broke, and he demanded a divorce. Michelle was furious that Brandon initiated the divorce, and while he was at work, she got back at him. "I had a very nice saltwater aquarium with thousands of dollars worth of fish in it," Brandon says. "She poured Comet into it and killed all the fish." But Michelle didn't stop there. Brandon also had a beloved dog named Domino. Michelle stuffed the dog with sleeping pills, which led to the death of the living creature. Michelle put Domino to sleep. "If you're shocked at this point, we've only scratched the surface," Brandon says. "It was a nightmare that wouldn't stop. You can't make that girl go away." Unfortunately, Brandon learned the truth about Michelle when his own marriage was completely destroyed. Everything Michelle did with Brandon Dixon pales in comparison to her adventures with other men. It was later revealed that John Paul Ray, also a student at the high school Michelle attended in Hearst, was the father of her first child. Instead of revealing this information to John, she told Kenneth O'Brien that the child was his, forcing him to marry her. Kenneth, for 13 years, thought the eldest son was his own. John later told police that Kenneth paid child support from age 5 to 18 and did not know he was not the father. After Brandon and Michelle divorced, she moved in with John, the father of her first child. They lived in a common law marriage for 8 years. The relationship came to an abrupt end when John began to suspect his wife of cheating. Michelle didn't deny it. She confirmed the affair on the side.
John moved out, leaving most of Michelle's possessions. Michelle's next love was Greg Williams. They were both not so young anymore. Both had a history of past marital failures. The man was married twice and had a daughter. After Greg and Katie divorced in 2003, the couple agreed to share custody of their common daughter, Taylor. However, there was no formal agreement on child support, because the former spouses had a good relationship. Rich, successful, and generous Greg was a perfect match for Michelle. In 2007, Greg and Michelle had a common daughter, Michaela. A year later, they got married. Their marriage was like the American dream. Money, children, love, it was all in abundance. Michelle seemed to have made it through the thorns to the stars and got the life she had always dreamed of. Greg Williams held his family in very high esteem. He grew up in a family with fierce principles and achieved everything on his own from an early age. He loved sports and was a martial arts black belt. In addition to his love of exercise, Greg was also a fan of guns. Both he and Michelle had guns that they kept in their home in Keller. Michelle's gun, a silver .40 caliber pistol, was kept in a safe, but Greg kept his gun, a black Liebherr .45 caliber, always loaded in a case under his bedside table. The couple was determined to make their marriage a success. They threw birthday parties for their children from other marriages at their home in Keller. Michelle's adult children would have barbecues and swim parties. Very often the house was full of friends. But despite the picturesque suburban home and a precocious daughter, Greg and Michelle were not the classic American couple. They met through an online community for bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism, and their wild adult house parties led to numerous complaints from neighbors. Without making the matter public, the couple decides to move out. The night before, Michelle and Greg had been unable to sleep for a long time. They were preparing to buy a new house for $4.5 million. They emotionally discussed the upcoming event. Greg stayed in the bedroom alone. Michelle went out to her crying daughter and fell asleep with her in the room. On October 13, 2011, at 4:40 a.m., an emergency call came in. A crying woman screamed into the phone that she and her husband had been attacked by a robber. She was injured, and her husband had been shot. Within minutes, police arrived at the scene of the tragedy. Inside the home, detectives found a television on full volume and a baby sleeping on the couch. Michelle's daughter was sound asleep and unaffected in any way by the attack that occurred. The woman's behavior alerted police officers. She was behaving rather strangely and did not look like she had just experienced a burglary. Soon, the gated community was filled with police cars, detectives, and forensic experts. The lot was cordoned off, and police searched every inch of the nearly 5,000-square-foot home.
Michelle was fully dressed, had her hair styled, and was acting very calm. She told police she was asleep, but her clothing and demeanor said otherwise. As the only witness, Michelle was taken to the Keller Township Police Station for questioning. After several hours of talking to police and investigators, Michelle's story began to fall apart like a house of cards. According to the woman, the intruder, dressed in all black, hit her on the head with a wrench. She fell from the blow, but was conscious and heard a gunshot. The stranger then fled through the back door of the house. Michelle Williams's account did not match what police saw at the scene. Greg Williams was shot in the head while lying in bed. A .45 caliber handgun, presumably used by the intruder, was found near the back door next to a wrench. There were no fingerprints on either weapon. Neither was found to show any signs of forced entry. The family's valuables and money were untouched. Examined CCTV footage from a neighbor's camera showed that only one car had entered the gated community in the hours before the crime. Police confirmed that the car belonged to a newspaper delivery man. To confuse the investigation, Michelle came up with a version of the attack. She hit herself with a wrench and made their large house look like the scene of the attack. But detectives did their due diligence and noticed a number of details that didn't add up. Michelle Williams was fully dressed, her hair was styled, and she had fresh makeup on her face. It gave the impression as if she was waiting for someone. The gun used during the crime was found in the house without any fingerprints, and the final detail that proved Michelle's lie was the $20,000 in cash that was not stolen in the robbery. Michelle had no explanation for why a successful businessman and devoted father decided to take his own life. but she was able to explain her behavior. Michelle claimed she wanted to spare their young daughter the bitter truth about her father's self-inflicted death. She admitted to police that she wiped down the gun and washed Greg's hands to cover up fingerprints before desperately staging a home invasion and calling emergency services. As bizarre as that explanation was, it became obvious to police why no evidence was found in the house. Michelle admitted to wiping the crime scene with bleach and hitting herself in the face with a wrench to present a more realistic picture of the attack. From the beginning, Keller police doubted the credibility of Michelle's testimony. But at the time, no physical evidence was presented linking her to the crime. Michelle was arrested for perjury, but was soon released home. Around 5 p.m. on the evening of her husband's murder, Michelle went to her sister Laura's home and did not mention the late Greg's name once during the evening. Michelle cried from time to time, but it didn't seem sincere, her sister Laura Cusick said when questioned by police. The morning after the tragedy, Michelle woke up in a great mood. She was beautifully dressed, with her hair styled and makeup on. In high spirits, the recent widow went for breakfast at a famous restaurant that served the best pancakes with syrup. While the police were looking into the theory that Greg had taken his own life, struggling to find a motive and obtain credible evidence of it, Michelle herself presented the investigation with first a motive and then evidence of her guilt. Going through the documents from the first interrogation, the investigators were attracted by Michelle's words that she didn't care about a single penny. But her actions proved otherwise. After Greg's death, Michelle quickly begins liquidating assets from family companies and spending large sums of money. She cashes checks through Greg's IT company. The amount of checks cashed is not disclosed anywhere. In all likelihood, we are talking about a lot of money. After receiving cash from the sale of the Blueberries frozen yogurt store in Keller, Michelle made one of her biggest blunders. She went to the insurance company, hoping to get a payout on Greg's life insurance policy. Michelle was the sole beneficiary on Greg's life insurance policy, which was taken out on August 12, 2011, almost exactly 2 months before he was killed. But one important fact the woman missed. According to the terms of the insurance policy, Greg's death was not an insured event because he left his life voluntarily, and at the last moment, she was denied the money. The desire to get the insured sum of $600,000 was the main motive for the crime. Later, another important fact of financial fraud comes to light that casts suspicion on the widow. Fictitious financial documents for a mortgage loan were used to purchase the house that Greg and Michelle had been preparing for on the eve of his death. The account numbers were intentionally changed, and the lender did not immediately notice the elaborate fraud. When Greg died, Michelle canceled a meeting with the mortgage company, and the fake account was not discussed until it caught the attention of the police. Michelle, confident of her impunity, writes a check for $18,000 to attorney Kenneth Wincorn, and takes a week-long vacation to Grapevine with her children. During the 3-month investigation into Greg Williams' death, police were able to unravel his wife's web of deceit. An autopsy was performed on Greg, which proves that the man was shot from a range of 12 to 18 inches. Moreover, the toxicology examination conducted provided a report proving that Greg had a large dose of sleeping pills in his system at the time of his death. Also, the police determined that there was no assault on the house. Mrs. Williams sedated her husband and shot him from a foot away after turning up the volume on the television. Daughter Michelle, who was asleep in her room, did not hear anything. On November 3, 2011, based on the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's report, Greg Williams' death was officially ruled a homicide. Michelle Williams was arrested on January 9th as she was on her way to a fitness center. She was charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and making a false statement to police. Michelle was both the only witness to the crime and the only suspect. Bail was set at $522,000 to be released from custody pending a court hearing. But Michelle spent a week in custody and was released on $85,000. Dressed in gym clothes, Michelle walked out of jail with a GPS monitor and under the arm of attorney Kenneth Wincorn, who was now officially representing her. Greg's first wife, Kathy, was furious when she found out that attorney Wincorn was defending Michelle. That money she paid him was part of Greg's estate, and it should never have gone to pay the legal bills of the woman who was accused of killing him. Online court records list Kenneth Wincorn as the attorney for Katie and Greg's divorce in 2003, and Wincorn's name and signature appear on legal documents regarding the custody agreement for their shared daughter Taylor in 2008. However, Kenneth Wincorn's defense of collusion with Michelle Williams will be exonerated by providing evidence. The divorce was handled by his company, and he personally never represented Greg. Kenneth Wincorn said he first learned of Greg's murder from an IT company employee. It was very shocking, Wincorn says, adding that Michelle later sought his help. After her plot to cash in on Greg's death is foiled, Michelle Williams changes her name to Shelley and appears as a fitness guru hoping to start a new life. On Facebook, Shelley publicly announced her relationship with Gene Wallace, a friend of her oldest son, a man nearly 15 years younger than her. Shelley and Gene opened a fitness club in Bedford and heavily promoted it online. Armed with an ankle bracelet with a GPS tracker, Michelle spent the next few months enjoying her new boyfriend, fitness classes, and court hearings. She often appeared in court dressed for a night out on the town, wearing miniskirts, knee-length boots, and deep-cut blouses. She never mourned Greg's death for a second, says Greg's ex-wife, Kathy. Rob Conover was friends with Greg Williams for more than 20 years and attended many of Michelle's hearings. He recalls how she deftly manipulated police officers at the courthouse, making them see her as an innocent woman in need of protection. On October 9, 2013, 45-year-old Michelle Williams took a plea deal with the county and pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence and deadly conduct. She will receive 18 years in prison for tampering with evidence and for deadly dangerous conduct, a third-degree felony that only exists in a few states. Although Michelle admitted that she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the absence of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about whether the first-degree murder charge would stick. Things can go differently. Play big, win big, or lose big, Michelle said in an interview. With the plea bargain, I expect to do a couple years, and after that, I'll be out on parole. But in February 2014, Michelle Williams, in an interview, suddenly changes her testimony and says she is not guilty of the crime. The judge immediately rescinds the plea bargain and sets a date for the first trial. Opening arguments have begun in the trial of a Texas woman, dubbed by the media as Keller's Black Widow, who was accused of intentionally targeting her husband in 2011 for an insurance payoff. Michelle Williams, 45, was charged with the crime. In court, prosecutors described the crime as a clearly planned scheme of acts to profit from Greg's substantial life insurance policy. In their opening statement, prosecutors told jurors that Mrs. Williams shot her husband in the head after drugging him with sleeping pills beforehand in order to collect on his life insurance policy. The motive was money, time-tested money, greed, Assistant District Attorney Jack Strickland said in court. Although Michelle admitted that she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the absence of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about whether the first-degree murder charge would stick. In response to an interview request, Michelle's attorney released a statement on her behalf. Attorney Kenneth Wincorn described the difficulties in the case caused by the spotlessly clean crime scene. The prosecution struggled to prove a premeditated crime, disregarding the fact that there was no DNA from the suspect. In repeated searches, cleaning products were found, but it stands to reason that Michelle's fingerprints were on them, since the products were in the house where she lived and did the cleaning. If the jury concludes that Michelle tampered with evidence of Greg's death, making it look like the man had spontaneously passed away, and then cleaned up the crime scene by hiding evidence and then lying about it, she will get a life sentence. But if Michelle is sentenced as scheduled on April 21st, no jury will ever get a chance to hear the whole story and decide on the appropriate punishment. Through careful questioning of the Williams couple's friends and acquaintances, information regularly emerged about the unfavorable environment that had prevailed in their family for a long period of time. According to the studied correspondence in social networks and messengers, it was found that the couple quarreled very often, and the reason was finances. At the trial, prosecutors said that in the hours leading up to the violent death, Greg Williams argued with his wife over their finances and even slapped her for spending a large amount of money that had been set aside as a down payment on a house. But Michelle Williams' defense argued that Greg Williams had taken his own life and that the successful business owner needed his wife alive, not dead. According to defense attorney Clay Graham, Greg Williams often suffered from depression and regularly used sedatives and steroids. On the eve of the crime, he was allegedly severely depressed due to the loss of his grandmother and best friend, who ironically had taken his own life. Defense counsel told the court that when Michelle Williams found her husband dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound, she panicked and in a fit of fear began to cover up the tragedy without realizing it. She had one goal: to protect her 4-year-old daughter from psychological trauma by hiding the truth from her. Michelle Williams never once changed herself, presenting at court hearings in different images, with styled hair and manicure. At one hearing, the defendant, dressed in an off-white blouse and black vest, showed little emotion throughout most of the trial, but did not forget to wipe away tears during a presentation of photographs showing images of the body of murdered Greg Williams. The court also heard testimony from Michelle Williams' adult son, Andrew O'Brien, who said his mother, Michelle Williams, asked him to help frame Greg Williams' ex-wife, Kathy. She planned to blame her for Greg's death using the motive of unreconciled differences over the custody of their daughter, Taylor. But that plan was a failure from the get-go. After all, there was never any disagreement between the former spouses about the custody of their daughter, and it would have been very difficult to prove otherwise. Asked about his reaction to his mother's unusual request, 26-year-old Andrew O'Brien said he was very shocked by such a proposal and thought she was having a mental breakdown. Michelle confronted her sons at the trial when they testified against her. The jury later found Michelle guilty of felony tampering with physical evidence. According to the show, she provided false information that she was pregnant with twins, hoping to delay her sentencing. But this version was not confirmed and the verdict was announced. Michelle's acting abilities and her natural charm, which she tried her best to demonstrate during each hearing, did not spare her from a harsh sentence. Sandwiched between a scenario in which she was a cold-blooded criminal and one in which she was portrayed as a deranged wife and mother acting on impulse, Michelle chose the latter. "He did it," she said, wrapping her arms around her head. Michelle even congratulated the detective on solving the case. "I wouldn't have gotten through the day," she said. "You've won." Even before the police admitted to doubting Michelle's story, few believed Greg had lost his life. He had too much to live for, and he knew all too well how much pain an untimely death causes. Kathy Williams believes that Michelle's relationship with Gene Wallace began when Greg was still alive and may be the elusive motive for this crime. If Greg had found out she was sleeping with her little boyfriend, he would have dumped her, and she would have gotten nothing. Katie says, "Greg was willing to put up with a lot, but he wasn't willing to put up with cheating." "She's ruined so many lives you can't even imagine," Brandon says. "She's a professional manipulator. If the courts had gone further and interviewed all of us, things could have gone in a different direction." Michelle was sentenced to 60 years in prison. The judge also ruled that she would have to serve a minimum of 30 years before being eligible for parole. Michelle currently remains incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, Texas. Michelle Williams is a felon and fraudster who is currently serving time in prison for all of her willful acts. She has never shown remorse for her actions and still refuses to take full responsibility for her crime.